My sister's family mocked my clothes and job when I entered engagement party. I revealed I acquired their company. I terminated their contracts. As soon as I arrived for the engagement party for my sister, the family of the groom treated me as if I were a servant. This feeling continued until I left the party. During the time that they were continually bragging about their high-status positions at global enterprises, they mocked my simple wardrobe and reprimanded me for not getting a real job. Every single moment they were discussing the positions that they held. They had no idea that I did not work there, or that I knew someone who did work there. They were absolutely uninformed of both of these facts. On the contrary, the truth was far more simple and a great deal more humiliating for them than they had anticipated. They were about to experience their worst nightmare, and I was about to let them know about it. The fact that I controlled global enterprises was about to become their worst nightmare. The Grand Regency Ballroom in Manhattan had a chilling atmosphere that made it feel less like a celebration and more like a tightly regulated environment that was designed to reinforce the feeling of superiority that those who believed they belonged there had. This was done in order to ensure that those who believed they belonged there felt an even stronger sense of belonging. There were a number of elements that contributed to the space's breathtaking and ostentatious display of old money excess. These elements included crystal chandeliers that appeared to hold the light of 100 suns, soaring ceilings that felt oppressive rather than grand, and a ridiculous life-sized sculpted ice swan that was slowly, inevitably, weeping into a pool of expensive condensation. The low, confident hum of New York social networking, which comprised of fitting suits, inherited titles, and buzz that was self-important among individuals, formed an environment that was dense and nearly stifling. This environment arose as a result of the fact that the buzz was self-important among individuals. Please allow me to introduce myself as Catherine Moore. According to the official version of events, I am the founder of Moore Technologies and the current CEO of the company. Today, I am 29 years old. A worldwide software infrastructure powerhouse that is valued at $15.7 billion this quarter is the result of what started out as a server room in a garage that was borrowed 6 years ago. This growth was fueled by caffeine and pure willpower. The unseen pipes that make it feasible for major corporations to carry out their commercial activities are the pipelines that we are. We are the foundation upon which risk-free online commerce is built. This hitherto unknown facet of the natural world was an excellent match for me. On the other hand, in contrast to the world of McAllister, which thrived on being noticeable, loud, and acquiring prestige, this world was the complete antithesis of everyone else. There was one thing that was absolutely unknown to everyone who was present at this event, particularly the McAllisters themselves. This was the single most significant fact that I had witnessed in my recent business history. The aggressive leveraged acquisition that Moore Technologies had carried out in a stealthy and surgical manner 24 months ago, resulted in the company acquiring a controlling 57% equity position in Global Enterprises, a diversified holding company that had been in operation for a century. The McAllister family viewed this exact same firm as if it were their own personal thief, the source of their entire identity, wealth, and sense of self-worth. This was the very same company. I was effectively and discreetly the chairwoman of their board, leading the transition and restructuring from behind a number of sophisticated shell companies. I managed the transition and reorganization. I was holding out for the perfect opportunity to emerge from the shadows and take charge of the situation because I was waiting for it. Tonight I was playing a role that I had become so bored of playing. The role of the plain older sister. I was trying to get used to playing this character. It was a deliberate choice on my part to put on an outfit that was not only trendy but also absolutely ordinary. I am currently donning a cashmere dress that has a boat neck that is fitting, and a slate hue that is muted. In addition to that, I am wearing a pair of basic black velvet slippers and a classic chain made of solid gold that is worn on my wrist in a discreet manner. Without a shadow of a doubt, there will be no gemstones, vivid logos, or designs that are immediately recognizable. It was unable to find any evidence that led to a billionaire. Personally, I took care of this for Jessica. Although she was already a complete mess, she was going to marry Ryan McAllister, and she was terrified of his hypocritical mother, Elizabeth. This was despite the fact that she was already a shambles. The last thing that Jessica wanted was for me to accidentally outshine her when she was having her great night, or even worse, for me to offer the McAllisters further ammunition to use against the poor Moors from the countryside. Both of these scenarios would have been extremely unfortunate for Jessica. While I was walking around, I noticed Jessica standing next to a stunning floral arrangement that was hanging on the wall. She was clothed in an ivory lace gown that was a perfect fit for her, and she stood out as a lovely and worried figure. The frantic rush with which she embraced me appeared to convey a great deal about the amount of pressure that she was experiencing at the time. She hushed. "Catherine," as she spoke. "Oh, thank God you made it," she said to him. "You look perfect. So understated. So much better than Charlotte's ridiculous gold lame disaster. It actually looks like she's melting under the chandeliers." "Muted is my motto tonight." I comforted her as I gently squeezed her palm and smoothed down a stray curl that had begun to grow on her temple. I also reassured her that, muted is my motto tonight. Just blend into the wallpaper and celebrate my gorgeous sister. Seriously, stop worrying about them. They're just people. In a split second and with a great deal of force, the moment of peace was shattered as the family who considered themselves to be the ruling class of the Grand Regency entered the room. In addition to being a member of the McAllister family, Ryan McAllister, who was engaged to my sister, was employed by Global Enterprises as a senior investment manager. On this particular day, he gave off the impression of being arrogant, carrying the weight of his felt importance like a heavy load. He was beautiful, but in a manner that was corporately sterile, and he gave off the impression that he was carrying the weight of his popularity. It was his mother, Elizabeth McAllister, who played the part of the matriarchal antagonist in the novel and emanated a cold judgment, as well as his older sister Charlotte, who was the director of public relations at Global Enterprises. He was surrounded by his mother and his sister. The three individuals advanced forward in the direction of the audience, forming a neatly structured unit of scorn. Their pricey perfume had a powerful and lingering aroma that lingered in the air and lingered there. Elizabeth, a woman whose large diamond looked to have taken the place of her capacity for empathy, was one of the first persons to approach us. She was one of the first people who approached us. By wearing a sapphire gown that was created to order and appeared to have cost Jessica a half year's worth of her teaching wage, she was able to achieve the exact impact that she had hoped to achieve all along. Elizabeth said, "Jessica, my darling, you look simply radiant. Absolutely radiant," as a massive and garish diamond ring caught the light on her claw-like hand. "You look absolutely radiant with that ring. Jessica. You look absolutely radiant." Jessica was the recipient of her enormous smile, but her eyes went to me and paused for a while before landing on my muted slate attire with a look that was a mixture of barely veiled pity and profound confusion. "Jessica, you look absolutely radiant." As she paused for a time, her head was tilted in such a way that it appeared as though she was examining a peculiar insect. "And you must be Catherine. Ryan has mentioned you. You are the one who does the little freelance website designs for small businesses in, where was it? Brooklyn." The atmosphere suddenly became more intense, turning cold and oppressive, and I discovered that I was experiencing a level of tension that I hadn't experienced since the beginning of my fight for funding. I experienced the normal, searing sensation after being terminated from my position. "I own a technology firm, Elizabeth," I said in a level-headed manner, while giving my hand to her as a polite display of professional respect that she certainly did not deserve. I was able to maintain my composure during the entire interaction. Elizabeth offered a fingertip handshake, barely making touch with the other person, and said, "More technologies. We build global corporate infrastructure for enterprise clients." It appeared as though she had just admitted that I had been selling hand-knitted dog sweaters on Etsy thanks to her look. "Ah, yes, the freelance work. I'm sure it keeps you busy. It's lovely that you have a little hobby, dear. Well, one must start somewhere, don't you think? Now Jessica, about the seating chart." She turned her back on me in the middle of the sentence, loudly discussing the placement of the junior staff, which consisted of us, versus the important guests, who were them. Charlotte was adamant about getting to the bottom of the matter despite the fact that nothing had changed. She took a long, deliberate sip of champagne while her eyes went over my entire figure, analyzing each and every fold of the cashmere dress. My entire body was a target for her scrutiny. "That dress is incredibly interesting, Catherine. It looks so comfortable, like something you'd wear to the grocery store on a rainy Tuesday. It's almost aggressively bland. You really should try to elevate your style, especially now that you're associating with the McAllister family. My brother Ryan is practically royalty at Global Enterprises. We have a certain corporate reputation to uphold. You know, appearances matter to our clients." Ryan, seeing that his sister's attack had landed, joined in, attempting a smile that was condescending but didn't reach his icy eyes. "You know, appearances matter to our clients. You know, appearances matter to our clients. Don't worry, Jessica. When we're married, we'll help Catherine out. We can't have her looking like this at important family gatherings. I know a friend who has an opening for a junior project coordinator at a mid-sized marketing firm. Maybe she could take on some minor social media consulting for a local nonprofit. I'm sure my mother could pull some strings with her contacts to get her some visibility and a proper title. There was a constant cacophony of grating that was produced as a result of their casual harshness in their comments, as well as their complete and utter rejection of years of risk and invention that were carried out over the course of 12-hour days. Despite the situation, I was able to keep my cool. Those who are truly successful do not feel the need to boast about their achievements, and this served as a reminder to me of that fact. Insecure and fragile individuals often use their titles as a shield to insulate themselves from their vulnerabilities. When I remarked, "That is very generous of you, Ryan," the razor-sharp edge that was below my voice was covered by the mild, almost too sweet tone of my voice. I said this because I wanted to get my point across. But More Technologies just signed a $2.5 billion contract last quarter. We focus on infrastructure contracts, not social media content for nonprofits. I think I'll stick with my hobby for now. Because Elizabeth sneered loud enough for several people who were close to stop what they were doing and turn their heads. This effectively converted my humiliation into a public event. People turned their heads and stopped what they were doing. Infrastructure, my dear. You simply don't understand the difference between labor and capital, between plumbing and policy. Global Enterprises is global. We don't handle infrastructure like some utility company. We manage billions in assets. We set market trends across 3 continents. Ryan's upcoming promotion to Senior VP is a testament to the family name and connections. That is real power, Catherine. Not some little startup you run from your apartment, is it? You should consider getting a proper job with benefits. It was the 9th time in 10 minutes that they had mentioned Global Enterprises, and they had emphasized the name as if it were a shield against any criticism, a sign of ultimate inherited superiority from generation to generation. It was the moniker that they lived and breathed for the entire time. It was then that they made the mistake that would ultimately decide their predicament. A plain business transformation was not adequate, I came to the conclusion. Rather, it required a level of public and broadcast catastrophe. I arrived to this conclusion after arriving at the conclusion. Charlotte, who was evidently eager to land a final blow that would win the battle, moved closer to me and focused her gaze on my wrist. She was plainly feeling the need to win the contest. The one and only item that was present was a single piece of jewelry that had a very simple appearance about it. Presented here is a vintage chain bracelet that is composed of solid gold and is completely devoid of any embellishments. After all was said and done, it was the present that my grandmother had given to me. A thick buttery gold necklace, a keepsake that is more significant to me than all of their promotional baubles combined. I cherish this necklace more than ever. Charlotte reached out and grasped my wrist. She then put the bracelet up to the light and scrutinized the dull gold with an odor that could be described as one of complete and utter revulsion. Her question was, "Oh, what is this pitiful thing?" I questioned her. Almost immediately she discarded it with a glance that communicated her distaste for the theatricality of the situation. "Seriously, Catherine, is that plated? It looks like something you pick up at a flea market. Honestly, it really cheapens the look, even with your sensible dress. You know, Global Enterprises has a corporate jewelry line for their female executives. I can send you a voucher for something a little less tarnished. A piece of real gold, perhaps something with provenance." It was at that very moment when the word tarnished hit me like a blow to the body. Those pieces of jewelry were not the problem at hand. Specifically, it was about the continual humiliation that was aimed toward me, my sister, and the memory of my grandma, with the intention of reducing all of us. The individuals in question were not merely making fun of my outfit. They were criticizing not only my worth but also my integrity, in addition to the decision that Jessica had made with her own family. Suddenly, the reservoir of patience ran dry, and in its place came the icy, lethal and calculated clarity of a chief executive officer who was prepared to carry out a hostile personal strike against enemy combatants to eliminate them. I said, "Excuse me for a moment," with a voice that was barely above a whisper, but it held an unmistakable edge of finality that prompted Elizabeth to hesitate. "I apologize for the delay." Immediately after Elizabeth became aware of my withdrawal, she quickly and authoritatively raised the volume of her voice. "Don't you dare walk away while I'm talking to you, Catherine. You need to learn some manners before you officially join our family circle. This is an important lesson." As I rapidly made my way past the Wailing Ice Swan and along the corridor that led to the main offices of the hotel, I gave her absolutely no attention at any point. I was able to recover my phone and make use of a secure direct corporate satellite connection that I had established specifically for the purpose of utilizing in the case of an unusual or unexpected incident. Immediately after I dialed the number, I was connected to Michael Foster, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Global Enterprises. Up until 24 months ago, he was a colossus who could not be defended against any challenge. His actions were Accordance with my strategic guidelines, and he was now an employee that I paid a very nice salary to carry out my instructions. Michael, it's Catherine. I need you to initiate Project Nightingale. Code 1. In spite of the fact that Michael's voice sounded subdued, it included a tremor that conveyed a sense of astonishment and rapid assent. Code 1, Miss Moore. That's immediate termination without cause, no severance, pending formal review for 3 people. Correct. Charlotte McAllister, Director of PR. Ryan McAllister, Senior Manager, Investment. And Elizabeth McAllister. She's not an employee, but I want her personal access keys, corporate parking pass, and the family's reserved annual box at the Met Opera revoked. Effective now. Send out the immediate termination email to Charlotte and a mandatory administrative leave notice to Ryan citing gross misconduct, abuse of corporate resources, and egregious violation of the shareholder code of ethics. I want these notices sent to their personal phones and their global emails right now. And Michael, make sure the reply all function is enabled on Charlotte's notice. I want the whole executive floor to see it. It will be done, Chairman. Everything is ready on this side. Legal and HR are standing by. Michael, who was fully aware that he should not quarrel with the woman who controlled 57% of his entire existence, provided the quick confirmation. Michael was the one who delivered the affirmation. My corporate counsel, Eleanor Mitchell, was already waiting in a taxi 3 blocks away when I sent her a single encrypted text message. I did this after I had finished my last operation. Neither Michael nor Eleanor Mitchell were related to each other in any manner. Eleanor was the only other person in the city who was aware of the full extent to which I owned the property. She was the only person who knew about it. Come to the Grand Regency Ballroom, Code Silver, bring the documentation. As I made my way back to the table, I tried to keep a calm expression on my face, yet my eyes were blazing with a sense of danger and a surprising intensity. Charlotte McAllister proceeded to exhibit an image of her brand new corporate watch, which had a price tag of $12,000. The McAllisters continued to be grouped together in a cozy manner. The digital avalanche that was hurtling in their direction was completely unexpected to them, and they had no idea what it was. Charlotte rolled her eyes and said, "Honestly, Jessica," as she put her phone aside, "I'm completely honest with you. You really need to tell your sister that people who work for themselves look sloppy. It reflects badly on the Moore name now that we've graciously accepted you. You should be grateful we're giving you this social standing. Look at your sister. She can't even hold a proper conversation." Elizabeth made the most of the situation, taking pleasure in the attention of the individuals whom she had mistakenly misunderstood to be admiring her. "Catherine, I expect an apology for your abrupt departure. Now, let's discuss this administrative job for you. I'll call HR at Global Enterprises on Monday. We can probably squeeze you into an administrative assistant role, maybe $55,000 a year, no benefits for the first 6 months. That way you can start building a real portfolio and stop with the silly website business." Holding up my hand was a single decisive gesture that I made, and it had the effect of putting an end to the entire conversation. As soon as I stepped onto the stage as the primary performer, the audience, which had been buzzing with hundreds of conversations, seemed to immediately calm down. In stark contrast to the internal earthquake that was about to be unleashed by me, my calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the situation. "Victoria, Serena and Ryan, I am sorry for being so impolite," I began by saying, and my voice was clear, steady and carried throughout the entire ballroom by the time I finished my sentence. "But I can't apologize for my job, and I certainly can't apologize for my choice of accessories. But more importantly, I can't listen to you boast about your prestige any longer." It was because of the weight of 1,000 eyes pressing down on the McAllisters that I hesitated, which allowed the silence to hang heavy in the air in front of me. As Ryan started to shift his weight and became aware of the possible danger in my tone, I could see that he was growing increasingly nervous. I could sense that he was becoming more and more uneasy. Ryan said, "I'm sorry, Catherine. I didn't mean to be harsh," as he became aware that everyone in the room was watching him. "I'm sorry, Catherine." The individual was making an effort to retract his statement. "Oh, you meant every word, Ryan, but that's okay because I have a question for you all. You've mentioned Global Enterprises about a dozen times tonight, citing it as the source of all your prestige and power. Tell me honestly, do you think power is derived from merely working for a company or from owning it?" Elizabeth let out a short, condescending little chuckle because she was unaware that she was standing on a trap door. This may have been the reason why she laughed so much. It was almost as if her disdain was about to explode. "Oh, Catherine, please stop talking in riddles. You clearly wouldn't know the difference. The adults here know that management controls the power structure. The Moore family will never understand capital. I smiled in a way that was a little bit predatory, and it seemed entirely out of place on my face. I gave a tiny smile. I do know the difference, Elizabeth, because 24 months ago, Moore Technologies executed a carefully planned leveraged acquisition and bought the controlling interest in Global Enterprises. I own the majority shares. I am the chairwoman of the board. You work for me. The McAllisters were dealt a blow of a physical character by the words that were presented to them. The color drained from the faces of Elizabeth, Ryan and Charlotte in an instant, leaving them appearing like mannequins that were both expensive and terrified. I was able to make out the barely audible, high-pitched music that was emanating from the band that was taking a break downstairs. This was made possible by the extreme silence that reigned in the ballroom. A group of guests who worked in finance were present in the neighborhood, and they were looking at the scenario openly while checking their phones in a state of bewilderment. The first person to recover was Charlotte, and her face contorted in a profound display of visceral denial as she continued to heal. That's absurd. Impossible. My father helped build that company. It's a public company. We would know. You're lying to try and save face and ruin Jessica's engagement. It was unnecessary for me to wait for confirmation before I asked in a cheerful voice, "Am I?" It was already hitting their pockets more than any physical slap they may have received from the corporation's reaction. I asked it in a pleasant voice. Suddenly Ryan's phone, which he was holding loosely, vibrated with a harsh and distinctive sound that could only be recognized by an employee of Global Enterprises. The occurrence of this incident took place without any prior warning. The manner in which the executive emergency alert could be heard. This was the notification for an urgent email that was issued to all of the employees in the company. This is only used for important notifications that cannot be disclosed to the general public. During the time that Ryan was reading the subject line, his eyes became so big that they looked like saucers. During the course of his speech, his hand started shaking violently, and the glass of champagne started shaking in a manner that was potentially hazardous. Urgent HR notification. Executive personnel changes. Immediate action required. There were 2 notifications that rang on Charlotte's phone at the same moment, and each one appeared sequentially in rapid succession. In the first instance, it is a standard email, and in the second instance, it is a flashing push notice from the internet that is connected to the Global Enterprises company. Charlotte checked hers at the beginning of the process. It was possible to hear a high-pitched, choking shriek of complete and utter terror emanating from her throat as she battled to take proper breaths. Her hand rushed to her mouth, and as it did so, the silk fabric that she was holding to her mouth was crushed. Her voice shattered into a state of dread as she spoke in a whispered whisper. No termination for gross misconduct, effective immediately, and the entire executive contact list is copied. It was sent to everyone. Documentation of numerous instances of unethical activity pertaining to the selection of suppliers and the misuse of public relations budgets was included in the email. While reading his message, Ryan, who was trembling, was doing so. He looked up at Charlotte with tears welling up in his eyes, and a miserable squeak could be heard emerging from his mouth. Charlotte was the object of his sight. Mine says mandatory immediate administrative leave with full investigation into ethical conduct and resource mismanagement regarding the Singapore acquisition. What the hell, Charlotte? What did you do? After it was too late, he finally understood that the investigation was not about Charlotte. He had been wrong all along. The family was the primary focus of attention. The situation was entirely, utterly, and theatrically rejected by Elizabeth despite her best efforts. This is ridiculous, a mistake. Charlotte, call Michael Foster. Ryan, you march straight to the CEO's office on Monday and demand an explanation. You can't listen to this website, girl. Eleanor Mitchell, my attorney, entered the room at that very moment. She is not to be confused with Michael Mitchell, who was also present. While she was carrying a hefty leather-bound folio that was engraved with the official Moore Technologies seal, she made her way directly toward our table. She radiated a power that was both subtle and lethal, and she was a woman. Her attire consisted of a flawless black suit that she wore. All that was asked of her was a single word utterance. Furthermore, she was not just the final horrible piece of the puzzle, but she was also a living, breathing document of the dominance of corporations. No need, Elizabeth, I responded, making sure that my voice was heard clearly despite the background activity. I did this by looking her in the eye and ensuring that my voice was heard clearly. Michael Foster is taking my call right now, and as for demanding an explanation, he works for me. Eleanor here can provide you with the necessary legal documentation, proving my majority ownership. As of 5 minutes ago, neither Ryan nor Charlotte work for me, and your personal corporate access keys, which you routinely use for hotel bookings, personal shopping, and giving press access to Charlotte's friends, have been permanently revoked. Have the guard clear your box at the Met. effective immediately. As soon as Ryan made his appearance, it seemed as though he was on the edge of experiencing a complete and total collapse of his body. She was silently shaking, tears mixed with expensive cosmetics, as Charlotte's high-powered position was being destroyed in a haze of cheap language, excessive pride, and one awful public fashion judgment. She was also wearing expensive cosmetics. Additionally, she was wearing makeup that was of a high price. In spite of this, Elizabeth McAllister made one last desperate attempt to save the program by performing a theatrical act. She spun around to face Jessica and grabbed her arm with a ferocious and excruciatingly tight grip. She quickly turned around to face Jessica. "Jessica, you must stop her. Tell her she's destroying your future. You're going to be a McAllister. Fix this, or you will regret it for the rest of your life. Don't let your sister ruin everything." Jessica, who had been silent during the entirety of the talk, eventually spoke up after coming face to face with the poisonous and entitled character of her potential in-laws, which was taking place in a public setting with stunning clarity. In spite of the fact that the color of her cheeks was quite pale, the expression that was present in her eyes was one of a defiant and frigid determination that I had never seen before. The manner in which she removed Elizabeth's hand from her arm was one that was both delicate and meticulous. Due to the fact that her voice was faltering but steady, it echoed with a newly discovered great strength that hushed her. Even Elizabeth was unable to hear her voice. "My future isn't with people who humiliate my family for sport. Elizabeth, my sister, is my family. You are all guests here celebrating our choice, and you have just proven to me in the most spectacular way possible that the only thing you truly care about is a corporate title. You are not worthy of a single moment of my loyalty." That being said, Jessica reached up, removed the little 4-carat diamond engagement ring off her finger, and then placed it in a neat and careful manner on the spotless linen tablecloth next to Ryan's hand that was shaking. Ryan's hand was quivering. The stone was able to capture the light at a fleeting moment. It was with a loud and unmistakable voice that she announced, "The engagement is off," to the stunned and hushed gathering. With her eyes wet yet fierce, she turned her attention to me, and a smile that was just beginning to show itself was just beginning to be revealed. "Catherine, let's go home. I need a cheeseburger." I reached out and grasped Jessica's arm, bringing her that much closer to me. While we were making our way out of the room, Elizabeth suddenly sprang at me with tears streaming down her face. The carefully crafted mask that she had been wearing was completely destroyed, revealing the terrified, helpless, and feeble woman that had been hiding beneath it. "You evil, petty little girl. You'll regret this. This is my son's life. You can't do this to us." Having come to a complete stop, I continued to keep my hand on Jessica's elbow after I had stopped. I drew closer to Elizabeth and reduced my voice to a last frigid whisper that only she, Charlotte, and Ryan could hear. This was done in order to reduce the volume of the crowd, which was growing louder. I was the only person who happened to be able to hear it. "Petty. You called my grandmother's vintage solid gold bracelet tarnished and offered me a $55,000 receptionist job while you stole corporate parking passes. You humiliated my sister publicly, repeatedly. Your corporate ethics violations were always a ticking time bomb waiting for the next audit. Elizabeth, you just made the mistake of insulting the owner. You deserve this. And trust me, the corporate investigation into your entire family's fraudulent expense reports and misconduct, which Ryan's promotion was supposed to cover up, is just getting started. Enjoy the view from the outside, Elizabeth. You're done." As we went away, we decided to leave the hubbub, the crystal, the McAllisters, and the ice swan that was melting behind. The titles that they had been holding were taken away from them, and their futures were unpredictable. They stood among the ruins of their own conceit and proudness. When I got outside, the air in New York was fresh and brisk, and it was filled to the brim with a wonderful and exhilarating feeling of utter victory and an exquisite sense of independence. In spite of the fact that she was crying, Jessica seemed to be laughing at the same time. The release of stress that has been bottled up for years on end in a way that is both beautiful and restorative. That was the most dramatic, most expensive, and most perfectly executed corporate coup I have ever witnessed, Jessica cried as she dropped into the back of the taxi that was waiting for her. "It was the most perfect," she said. She took a big breath that was accompanied by a shivering sound. "I think I owe you a lifetime supply of your sensible cashmere and maybe a piece of your company." I was able to pull her into a hug while wearing a genuine smile on my face. "You owe me nothing, Jess. You are my sister, and nobody, especially not an arrogant, entitled family who thinks a job title is worth more than decency, gets to treat you or me that way. Their power was always an illusion. Mine is just quiet. Now let's go home and celebrate your glorious, stress-free freedom." The information would be made available to the whole public the next day. It is to be predicted that the share price of global enterprises would see a minor temporary fall as a consequence of the major unexplained executive personnel transfer, as well as the highly publicized executive resignations. This is because both of these events have been widely published. The McAllister name would be forever damaged and despised in business circles throughout the city as a result of a woman who refused to be underestimated and wore a basic slate dress. This was the reason why the McAllister brand would be tarnished and laughed at. As I looked down at my wrist, where the tarnished solid gold chain caught the reflection of the lights in the downtown area, a smile came on my face. It is not necessary for certain riches to shout in order for them to be identified. To put it another way, it is holding out for the perfect opportunity to come along. Fired by my sister, I built a new company in 6 months, securing $35 million in revenue and taking every major client. She was left with nothing. The announcement that your services are no longer necessary was made by Sophie Turner, whose voice reverberated over the mahogany table that was located in the boardroom of our family. Bring your office to a close by tomorrow. My sister was smiling with that self-satisfied smile that I was all too familiar with, and I surveyed the faces that were surrounding me. Board members had their eyebrows lifted, CEOs were shifting uneasily in their leather chairs, and my sister was smiling. The moment had been awaited by her for many years. In spite of the rage that was building up beneath the surface, I inquired with a firm voice, "Is that all?" "Yes, Emma. That will be all," Sophie replied, already turning her attention to the next agenda item. I gathered my notepad and pen, nodded politely to the board members, and walked out with my dignity intact. The heavy door closed behind me with a soft click that belied the magnitude of what had just happened. I was fired from our family business, Connors and Tate Solutions, which I had assisted in growing from a struggling regional logistics provider to a national powerhouse. My name is Emma Harris, and up until 10 minutes ago, I was the executive vice president of operations at the company that my grandfather had founded. I had been fired from my position. I had been the one responsible for securing contracts, building client relationships, and structuring the deals that accounted for the majority of our revenue for more than a decade. While Sophie focused on the image of the company and played politics with board members, I had been the engine that drove our growth in Nashville, Tennessee. I walked to my office, which was a corner space that I had earned through years of dedication. My assistant, Grace Bennett, looked up, and her expression immediately changed to one of concern when she saw my face. "Val, what happened in there?" I closed the door behind me before answering. "Sophie fired me. Effective immediately. I need to clear out tomorrow." Grace's mouth fell open. "She can't do that. Without you, she wouldn't be able to use this place." And she did. I sank into my chair, allowing myself just one moment of shock before the wheels in my mind started turning. Dad made her CEO, and the board approved it. It's her show now. But why? You've brought in over 65% of our major clients. I smiled faintly. And that's precisely why. I've outshined her for years, and she couldn't stand it. But as the initial shock subsided, a curious calm settled over me. I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out a leather portfolio that I had kept for exactly this scenario. Inside were documents that I had meticulously prepared over the course of the past 3 years, including contracts, agreements, and legal paperwork. "Grace," I said, my voice becoming more steady, "remember that restructuring I implemented 3 years ago, the one in which I created VC Strategy Group?" Her eyes widened with realization. "Your consulting LLC, the one that technically holds all the client contracts." I nodded, allowing myself the first genuine smile since I'd walked into that board meeting. I think it's time to remind my sister exactly who brings in the business around here. I'd seen this coming years ago. Our father, John Harris, had always favored Sophie despite her mediocre business acumen. She had the right look, the right connections, and most importantly, she never challenged his authority. I, on the other hand, had ideas. Too many ideas for a daughter in a traditional family business. "You're making waves, Emma," Dad would say whenever I proposed a new direction or efficiency. "Let's stick with what works." What worked apparently was letting Sophie take credit for my innovations. Sophie was the face of the industry at industry events while I was building relationships with shipping companies, warehousing facilities, and corporate clients across the Southeast. While I was negotiating terms that increased our profit margins by double digits annually, Sophie was giving presentations to the board using my numbers. Our differences went beyond the realm of business. I was the pragmatic one, more interested in logistics problems than country club politics. When I was growing up, Sophie was the beauty queen, homecoming royalty, and sorority president. I was the one who was all charm and social grace. My mother would ask me, not in an unkind manner, why I couldn't be more like your sister. She makes connections so easily. However, what they never understood was that I made connections as well. Just different ones. I made my move 3 years ago, when Whispers of Succession Planning was first established. Instead of attending cocktail parties, I focused on building relationships in conference rooms. Instead of social climbing, I focused on creating value. And over time, clients came to trust me, rather than the company brand or Sophie's polished presentations. My attorney assisted me in establishing VC Strategy Group LLC, a consulting firm that has only one client, Connors & Tate. Although it appeared to be a tax efficiency measure on paper, in reality, it was my insurance policy. This structure provides us with flexibility, as I explained to my father when I proposed it. It enables me to negotiate directly with clients without having to deal with all of the corporate red tape. He approved it without understanding its implications. Why would he question anything that improved our bottom line? To him, it was just another one of my efficient little fixes, not the foundation of my independence. Over time, I migrated all major client relationships to my LLC. The paperwork was there for anyone to see if they bothered to look. The announcement of Dad's retirement a month ago had accelerated everything, and the succession plan was revealed. Sophie would become CEO and I would remain in my operational role, essentially doing the work while she wore the title. However, Sophie was too busy planning her CEO office renovation to notice that the contracts listed VC Strategy Group as the primary service provider, with Connors & Tate as merely the fulfillment partner and Connors & Tate as the fulfillment partner. On the morning following my dismissal, I arrived early to pack my office. The building was quiet, and the majority of employees were not scheduled to report for another hour. I had purposefully chosen this time, as there was no need for an audience. As I was boxing up family photos and awards, my phone buzzed. It was Dylan Harper from Skyline Distribution, our most important client. What exactly is going on, Emma? I just received an odd email from your sister stating that she is my new point of contact. I smiled to myself and said, "Good morning, Dylan. Yes, there have been some changes. Sophie is the new CEO, but our agreement is with you." Dylan said, her voice displaying signs of confusion. "The contract is with VC Strategy Group. Does she understand that?" I responded, maintaining a neutral tone. "And I don't believe she has reviewed the contracts yet. Would you like me to clarify things with her?" "Please do. We signed with you, not with Connors & Tate. Your expertise is what we're paying for." After hanging up, I continued packing, now with a lighter heart. By the time I finished, similar calls had come in from 3 other major clients. None of them had any intention of working with Sophie. At 8:30 a.m., right as the office began filling with employees, my phone lit up with Sophie's name. Before answering, I waited for it to ring twice and said, "Hello, Sophie? Which client files are you looking for? And why is Dylan Harper saying that she won't work with us anymore?" Her voice was tight with controlled panic. "How come she is saying that?" In a cool and collected manner, I responded that the client files are precisely where they have always been, in the shared drive that is categorized by account. As for Dylan, she is exercising her contractual rights. "Why are you bringing up such a point? Who has rights under the contract?" I could picture her perfectly standing in her new CEO office, probably wearing one of her immaculate pantsuits, her face flushed with frustration. "Check the contract headings, Sophie. VC Strategy Group, which is my consulting company, is responsible for the contracting of all of our significant assignments. Connors & Tate is merely the partner in charge of fulfillment. Instead of working with the family brand, the clients decided to work with me." At that moment, the quiet on the other end was so loud that it was deafening. "You can't do this." I couldn't help but laugh out loud. I already did. A little over 3 years ago, in fact, with the agreement of Dad and the signature of the board on each and every paper. 1 octave was added to her voice as she said, "This is sabotage." "No, Sophie. This is a legal matter. You would like to be the CEO. You are very welcome. On the other hand, the connections, the trust, and the actual contracts that generate revenue are all mine." "I quit this morning," she declared with a smile. "And I told HR that I'll be joining VC Strategy Group effective immediately." By the time I hung up, Grace Bennett had already arrived at my door with a cardboard box containing her own personal possessions. I picked up my box and took one final look at the workplace where I had spent the previous 15 years. "Let's go," I said. "We have a company to build." The reality hit me full force. Then, this wasn't just about getting sweet revenge against Sophie. This was my opportunity to build something that was genuinely mine. In the evening, I had confirmed what I had previously assumed, which was that all 12 of our top-tier accounts would be following me. Together, these accounts accounted for more than 75% of Connors and Tate's yearly revenue. I spent the remainder of the day in my home office making calls to each and every important client of the company. What about achieving one's goals? Daniel Lewis, who works at Evergreen Supply Chain, posed the following question to Emma. You have the relationships, but are you able to handle the actual logistics work? It was a reasonable question. Up until yesterday, I had access to the infrastructure of Connors and Tate, including their warehouse network, their transportation partners, and their software systems. I gave him the assurance that I had previously arranged relationships with 3 regional fulfillment facilities. I've been anticipating this transition for some time, I said. There won't be any hiccups in your operations. The fact that those relationships had only been concluded that afternoon in a flurry of phone calls and hastily signed interim agreements was something that I did not tell him. I was in the process of developing the airplane while I was flying it. My dining room table was cluttered with legal pads, my laptop, and an empty pizza box by the time it was 9 o'clock at night. I had the clients, I had Grace, and I had a framework for operations. However, what I lacked was a team. What seemed to be reading my mind was a text message from Luke Matthews, our former operations manager. Heard what happened? Sophie is completely losing her mind. Half of the operations crew is prepared to walk. Have you hired? Another text message arrived before I could respond to it. This one was from Sophie and it said, there will be an emergency board meeting tomorrow at 8 a.m. It is necessary for you to be present. I laughed out loud. Required? Just a few hours before, she had terminated my employment and now I was suddenly indispensable. When Luke texted me back, I said, send me names. To anyone who might be interested. To Sophie, I simply said, I'll have my attorney attend. I was referring to the competitive packages that were available for everyone. This isn't a request, Emma, Sophie screamed over my phone. The board wants to understand what's happening with our client base. My phone rang instantly, and I let it go to voicemail. When it rang again, I finally answered it. You are obligated to provide them with an explanation. I don't owe anyone anything, I declared in a level-headed manner. You fired me. Always keep in mind that your services are no longer necessary. Those were the precise phrases that you used. It was before I had a complete understanding of the issue with the contracts. The agreements that have been finalized for a period of 3 years. Those that were accepted by both Dad and the board of directors. It is those contracts. You purposefully mislead each and every person. I took a deep breath and tried to calm my wrath before responding. No, Sophie. I developed a business framework that safeguarded not just the company but also the organization's customers. The fact that you have never bothered to learn how our company truly functions is not anything that I am responsible for. You are responsible for that. Because of this, your father will never forgive you. Despite the fact that it was a low blow, it was one that was expected. Perhaps our father had always been her trump card, but unlike you, I've learned to survive without his approval. Good luck with your meeting tomorrow. I sat in silence for a few minutes after the call was ended, allowing the weight of the day to sink over me. I had spent 15 years preparing for this moment, not consciously, but I had always known on some level that Sophie would eventually force me out of the relationship. My LLC hadn't been created as a weapon. It was a shield, a way to protect the value I'd built from family politics. My phone buzzed again. A text from our father. We need to talk. I set the phone aside without replying. Whatever he had to say could wait until tomorrow. Tonight, I needed to focus on building a company from scratch with clients already expecting service. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to sideline me, Sophie had inadvertently given me the push I needed to break free. For years I'd been pouring my talents into a company that would never truly be mine. Now I had the chance to build something that was. I opened my laptop and typed out the first line of a new business plan. VC Strategy Group. Fullervice Logistics Solutions. It had a nice ring to it. A flurry of events occurred the following morning. By 7 o'clock, Luke had emailed me a list of 8 employees who were prepared to join me immediately. By 7:30, my attorney, Sarah O'Connor, was on her way to the Connors and Tate board meeting to represent my interests. And by 8 o'clock, I was sitting in a temporary office space that I had managed to secure overnight, and I was conducting my first staff meeting as the official CEO of VC Strategy Group. It will not be easy, but we have something that Connors and Tate does not have anymore, and that is the relationships that matter. I explained to the small team that was gathered around a conference table that the situation is one of a kind. We have the clients and the expertise, but we are building our infrastructure on the fly. Grace and Luke nodded with confidence. The other individuals, the most of whom were analysts and account managers who had followed Luke, appeared anxious, but they were resolute. "What about the warehouse contracts?" inquired Ethan Carter, one of our logistics professionals. "Connors and Tate has exclusive relationships with the majority of the institutions in the region." As I recognized, they do, I explained. "Which is why we are not fighting on that front. I was successful in establishing agreements with establishments located in Chattanooga and Louisville. We are going to go through them till we are able to build our own footprint in the local area." "The board meeting just ended," she said, "and it was contentious." I put Sarah O'Connor on speakerphone, and she called in to disrupt the discussion. "It was contentious." I spoke forward and said, "Tell me," while indicating for the team to remain. My stomach tightened despite my confidence in our legal position, and the board shut her down completely. It appears that 2 of the members had actually read the contracts when they were signed and understood exactly what they were approving. Sophie attempted to argue that the structure of your limited liability company, LLC, was a breach of fiduciary duty. She wanted the board to pursue legal action. The fact that the structure had produced outstanding results for 3 years was brought to her attention, and I felt a wave of relief sweep over me. "So, there is no lawsuit?" "There will be no lawsuit. On the other hand, they did give her permission to make you a counteroffer. They are interested in involving VC Strategy Group as a formal permanent contractor with a commitment for a period of 3 years. To put it simply, they are offering to legitimate the exact arrangement that you already had, but with improved conditions." I couldn't decide whether to laugh or scream when they fired me and then offered to hire my company. "In essence, yes, the offer is actually quite good," I said. "Every year, 7 figures, minimums that are guaranteed and bonuses based on performance. Their situation is hopeless, Emma." "Absolutely, that is the case." I looked around at my new crew, all of whom were watching carefully. They had just lost 75% of their cash stream overnight at that very moment. "Tell them that I'll review their proposal, but in the meantime, we're moving forward with direct client relationships." After the call was over, I turned back to the team and said, "It seems that we have options." "Are you thinking about doing it?" Luke inquired with a worried expression on his face. "Shall I go back to them as a contractor?" I could understand his fear because he had just quit his job to join me. All of them had done the same thing. "I'm not considering anything that doesn't include all of you," I told them straight away. "But having Connors and Tate as a client rather than an employer could be advantageous while we build our own operations." The door to the temporary office opened, and a courier brought a hefty envelope to the reception area. Inside the mail was a formal offer from the board, as well as a note from my father that was handwritten. "You have outplayed each and every one of us. If I had made you CEO years ago, I would have done so." The buzzing of my phone dragged me away from my thoughts. It was a text from Sophie and it said, "This isn't over." I glanced at the note, my emotions churning. My father had finally acknowledged my significance after decades of being disregarded, but only after I shown my power to ruin the firm that he established. The answer is that it was not. At no point in her life had Sophie ever been one to gracefully accept defeat. On the other hand, for the very first time in our lengthy and laborious relationship, I did not feel concerned about her threats. I was with the customers. The most essential thing was that I had leverage, and I had a staff that was expanding. We worked 14-hour days, turning our temporary office into a command center of ordered chaos. The ensuing weeks formed a new reality that was far more tough than I had imagined. Building a firm from the ground up while simultaneously providing service to existing customers proved to be even more difficult than I had anticipated. An all-hands meeting was held every morning to discuss the most pressing concerns of the day, and every evening was concluded with a review of what we had accomplished and what still required attention. After 4 weeks, I finally had the opportunity to adequately react to the board's offer. I invited Sarah to evaluate my counterproposal before delivering it. The pace was unsustainable, but it was required for survival. While she was looking through the terms, she made the observation. "This is aggressive," she stated. "You are asking for double their offer in addition to equity in Connors and Tate, 4%. My clarification was sufficient to allow me to have a voice, but it was not sufficient to provoke hatred. Sarah sat back in her chair and asked, "Emma, can I be blunt? The feeling is quite personal." "It's a personal matter, of course. It is their family." "I am not referring to that at all. In this situation it seems as though you are trying to prove something rather than making the most effective decision for your company." Due to the fact that it contained truth, her observation was painful. Was I exerting too much effort in order to make a point? The initial offer made by the board had been generous. Doubling down could create an unnecessary adversarial situation, I nodded my head and acknowledged that you were correct. Revise it to a 20% increase over their offer while maintaining the equity request. According to what we offer to the table, that is a reasonable price. Then with a nod of approval, Sarah said, much better. What about your sister? What about her? Ever since she sent that text message, she has been noticeably quiet. I had been wondering the same thing. Sophie's quiet was unexpected and alarming. I have a meeting with her tomorrow, I said. Just the two of us away from the company, she requested it. Would you like me to be there? My head shook as I said, there are certain conversations that need to take place without lawyers. The following day I went to a little coffee shop that was located in the same general vicinity as both of our workplaces. Sophie was already seated when I arrived, and her expression was very difficult to read. As I sat down, she remarked, you appear to be exhausted. Building a company is exhausting, I responded by saying. You know that if you'd ever done it, it was a cheap shot, but weeks of stress had worn my diplomacy thin. In response to the bait, Sophie stated, I've been doing some thinking, while stirring her coffee. She was referring to the question of why you had established the LLC structure in the first place. Enlighten me. You never put your faith in us. Not me, not my father, and not the board of directors. You were constantly in need of your own personal secure net. I gave her remarks some thought. Sophie, trust is something that must be earned. Dad spent years ignoring my achievements while praising yours over the course of his career. Throughout the years, you have been taking credit for my work. In what specific way was I expected to put my faith? It was as if she was attempting to explain everything by saying, we are family. Family businesses fail precisely because people confuse family loyalty with business sense, I responded by saying. Dad made you CEO because you're his daughter, not because you were the best person for the job. And you established a covert business in order to steal our customers because, what is it that you are? Some business genius who seems to be misunderstood. In order to safeguard the value that I had constructed, I devised a framework. The value that you and your father were pleased to receive up until the point where you determined that I was expendable. After what seemed like an eternity, Sophie's veneer suddenly broke down. You want to know why Dad made me CEO than you? Simply because you are a cruel person, Emma. It is demonstrated by this prank involving the contracts. In order to demonstrate your argument, you would destroy the entire organization. The impact of her remarks was more than I had anticipated. Did they perceive me as someone who was eager to destroy the legacy of our family out of self-glorification? I didn't burn anything down, I responded with serene confidence. You lit the match when you fired me. I'm just making sure I don't get consumed in the flames. This moment of stark honesty was the culmination of decades of sisterly competition, and we glared at each other across the table. Now what are the next steps? At long last, Sophie inquired. That was the question that everyone was talking about. 4 months after Sophie had fired me, I was standing in the foyer of Covenir Defense, which was our most recent and largest client. As a result of their deal, the annual income of VC Strategy Group would surpass $35 million, which is roughly twice as much as what my team had accomplished while working at Connors and Tate. Edward Hughes, the procurement director for Covenir, offered me a tour of their plant and observed, "It is truly remarkable that you have constructed such an impressive operation in such a short period of time." We had a unique launching point, I further said. An established team, proven expertise, just under a new banner, and without the family drama I hear. He looked at me with a knowing expression and said, "Emma, Nashville's business community isn't about that big." The word spreads widely. I smiled in a manner that was appropriate for the situation. Every company has its own evolution story. It is true. Now we are thrilled to collaborate with you in a direct capacity. Your well-known reputation for engaging in hands-on management is precisely what we require for the revamp of our supply chain. I went back to our newly renovated permanent offices later that afternoon. They were located in a warehouse space that had been renovated, and it featured open workstations, exposed brick walls, and private meeting rooms that were named after our first customers. Just 4 months later, we had grown from 8 employees to 18. The Connors and Tate board accepted our counterproposal, and we are officially their primary logistics partner for the next 3 years, Luke said to me as he greeted me at the door. His joy was almost too much for me to contain. A complicated surge of feelings, including satisfaction, vindication, and a touch of grief, washed over me. Have they announced it internally yet? It is planned to take place tomorrow morning. It will be necessary for Sophie to convey to the entire organization the news that they have decided to outsource their primary business function to the company that her sister owns. That can't have been an easy pill for her to swallow. According to what I've been told, she battled it till the very last. Luke smiled. An ultimatum was finally presented to her by the board. Either agree to go into partnership or resign. I'm sorry, but she won't forgive me for this, I groaned. By no means. Are you concerned? It was a reasonable thing to ask, considering that Sophie and I had severed our connection a long time before this had arisen in the work world. When all was said and done, this arrangement had a sense of finality that was more weighty than a straightforward business competition. I care, I said to myself, but not enough to sacrifice what we're building here. A new era of expansion for VC Strategy Group was sparked by the official announcement of our relationship with Connors and Tate. We were able to pursue aggressive expansion since our previous employer was now effectively our largest client, which provided us with the stability we needed. It had been 6 months since Sophie had fired me when I found myself getting ready for a meeting that I had not anticipated having. When I arrived, my father was already sat at his preferred steakhouse, and he appeared to be older than I had remembered. He had requested that we have lunch together, just the two of us this time. You look good, Emma, he observed as I sat down. Excess suits you. The stress that had been caused by the company's near collapse had taken a visible toll on me. As I responded, thank you. I was unsure of the direction that this conversation was going to take. I owe you an apology, he said, seemingly taking me by surprise. In fact, I owe you several. I waited, allowing him the opportunity to continue, and then I said, I ought to have recognized your potential years ago. Should have appointed you to the position of CEO when I resigned. As he shook his head, he said, I was oblivious to the reality of the situation. No matter how capable they are, the crown is always passed down to the oldest child. Sophie had her strengths, I said, feeling an unusual impulse to defend my sister who was in need of protection. She did, but they weren't the right ones for leading the company. His gaze was fixed on mine and he said, Emma, you have outmaneuvered all of us. Establishing your very own safety net right in front of our own eyes. It's hard for me to decide whether I should be impressed or outraged. I smiled slightly and said, both would be appropriate, while I was speaking. The board is contemplating a reorganization, he added after a brief pause. They want to see you return to the organization. Not only your independent contractor business, but also you personally in your capacity as CEO. I nearly choked on my water. As for Sophie, she was able to make the shift to Chief Marketing Officer because to her inherent strength. She would never concede to that. She already has, he responded, subject to the condition. Which ailment is it? That you two are able to find a way to mend the bond that you have. Why am I here, Emma? Because of that. Not only in the role of your father, but also as the business's founder. We require both of you to collaborate with one another rather than competing with one another. From a distance, I sat back and processed this unexpected turn of events. I don't know if that's possible. Not likely at all. To be honest, isn't it worth a shot? The gap that had built between Sophie and me had become so great that I couldn't even fathom the possibility of mending it at this point. It had been 6 months since I had started my own business, and as I was leaving our new headquarters on a cool autumn evening, I couldn't help but smile at the illuminated sign that was hanging above our back door. Beginning with being fired and ending with the establishment of a successful firm had been a difficult but extremely fulfilling journey. I was able to turn betrayal into a phenomenal success by the time we had 35 workers, contracts worth many millions of dollars, and even Connors and Tate as a client. I was aware that there were a great number of more chapters to be written in my business tale as I looked toward the future. My sister's attempt to push me aside had, accidentally, given me the empire that I actually deserved. This is my favorite story, and it will always be the one that I remember the most. My girlfriend dumped me publicly, saying I was emotionally unavailable. I later found she'd shared my private messages. I left. Now, she regrets it. My girlfriend looked me dead in the eye and said, "My friends think you limit me, so we're done." And I just stared at her for maybe 3 seconds before I replied, "Cool, then go join them." And the silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife because her entire friend group was sitting right there at the table watching this unfold like it was some kind of reality TV finale they'd been waiting for. The way in which their expressions went from one of smug assurance to one of full shock conveyed to me all the information that I required to know about the person who had been in charge of our relationship for the past 8 months. I'm a cybersecurity analyst, which means that I spend my days analyzing patterns, recognizing threats, and finding solutions to problems using logic rather than emotion. People who had never taken the time to get to know me were the ones who incorrectly characterized me as emotionally unavailable. This is exactly what happened. I'm the kind of person who always arrives on time, not forgets important dates, inquires about how your day went, and truly pays attention to what you have to say. However, it would appear that this is not sufficient when you are being evaluated based on a checklist that a podcast host has created to determine what a boyfriend ought to be. 3 years ago, Sophia and I first collided at a coffee shop. At the time, she was in the middle of reading a book about minimalism, and I was in the middle of conducting a security audit for a client. The majority of people tend to make their lives more complicated than they need to be, while straightforward answers are more effective. The two of us would spend hours just walking around the city talking about everything from architecture to whether dogs dream. She was studying graphic design and she exuded a calm and collected attitude. In addition, it had a genuine feel to it, one that did not require Instagram stories or continuous affirmation from unknown individuals. Due to the fact that we interacted like actual grown-ups, our first year together was a truly positive experience. Although we each had our own lives, we nevertheless made time for one another. What's more, when issues arose, we resolved them via conversation rather than allowing them to fester. After around 10 months she moved into my flat, and the transition went off without a hitch. We divided up the work according to who was more skilled at what. When we were together we would cook on the weekends and we would joke about how boring we must appear to other people because we would rather stay home and watch documentaries than go out clubbing. She was then offered a position as a production assistant at the Empowerment Hour podcast, which she accepted. At that moment, everything began to change in ways that I was initially unable to recognize. It began with seemingly insignificant things, such as the introduction of new phrases into her repertoire. Words such as poisonous habits, emotional labor, and that doesn't benefit me were used in circumstances that didn't fully fit our actual scenario. I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. I will never forget the first time she came home and told me that we needed to have a chat about boundaries. I asked, "Okay, what's wrong?" And she got out her phone and began reading from notes that she had taken while she was recording a podcast about warning signs in relationships. I took the time to listen to everything that was going on, and then I asked her which of those warning signs she had actually observed in our relationship. She became quiet and explained that she was simply attempting to be proactive. As I look back, that ought to have been the first genuine warning sign that I should have taken into consideration. But I assumed that she was simply enthused about the job and attempting to apply what she was learning. Miranda, a woman who had developed an entire business on assisting women in recognizing manipulation and standing up for themselves, was the one who managed the podcast itself. This may sound like a nice idea on paper, but when you understand that the show's formula consisted of basically taking regular relationship friction and repackaging it as abuse, you realize that it was actually quite a bit more than that. In each episode they followed the same pattern, which consisted of reading anonymous submissions, analyzing them through the most uncharitable lens possible, and then celebrating women who had left their partners for reasons such as, "He wanted to discuss the budget before buying a new car," or "He asked me to text when I got home safe." Their audience devoured the show because it gave them the confidence to recognize warning signs in every situation. And the comment section was always full with individuals expressing their own stories about how they had eventually left their boyfriend, even if they had committed sins, such as being tired after work or having thoughts about dinner arrangements. Sophia began encouraging me to attend the live recordings that took place at this location in the downtown area twice a month. I attended because I wanted to show my support for her work, despite the fact that the atmosphere was unsettling to me. When I arrived for the first time, the entire production team gave me a look that suggested they were examining a specimen. In addition, Miranda came over during the break to introduce herself and quickly inquired about the nature of my employment. I told her cybersecurity and she got this smile and said, "Oh, so you're analytical. That must be challenging for Sophia. Like being good at my job was somehow a personality defect." I simply shrugged and said, "We make it work." And she patted my arm and walked away. After some time had passed, Sophia shared with me that Miranda had the impression that I was guarded, which was understood to mean that I was emotionally unavailable. Following the recording, we were heading to the car when Sophia stated, "They think you're emotionally unavailable." I asked her what she thought, and she hesitated for a brief moment, which led me to realize that she had been talking about me with them. Due to the fact that I did not always convey my emotions in obvious ways, she eventually responded with a negative response, stating that she did not believe that, but she could understand where they were coming from. Additionally, I brought to her attention the fact that I had spent a mere 5 hours the week before assisting her in the redesign of her portfolio website and listening to her anxiety around a challenging client. Nevertheless, it would appear that this did not qualify as emotional availability according to their concept. After that, The dynamic began to shift rapidly because all of a sudden, every routine interaction that we had was being analyzed through the lens of whether or not it was a warning sign or a healthy behavior. My suggestion would be that we remain in on Friday because I needed to apply a security patch early in the morning, and she would accuse me of isolating her from Italy if we did not stay in. She would respond by saying that I was demanding emotional labor when I asked her if she wanted to talk about why she appeared to be stressed. Because we both like going on hikes, I would make plans for a weekend trip to Blue Ridge, and she would query whether or not I was attempting to exert control over our schedule. Nothing I did was ever something that would be considered average for a person to do anymore. All of this was indicative of a more profound pattern that needed to be investigated and discussed with her friends who had never even had a genuine conversation with me. Observing her imitate their manner of speech was the most insane part of the experience. It seemed as though she would return home and use these nicely crafted words that were reminiscent of therapy speak, which sounded nothing like the way she used to speak. When I asked if we could turn down the TV since I was on a work call, she would say things like, "I'm noticing a pattern where you center your own comfort over my needs." I would just stare at her, wondering where my girlfriend had gone and who this person was reading from a script. She would say things like this. Several times I attempted to have a conversation with her about it. I asked her whether she felt like she was losing some of who she was after starting this new job. And she would immediately become defensive and declare that I was threatened by her development, as if she had been some kind of incomplete person in the past and was only now becoming her full self by studying our relationship to death with people who had decided that I was the villain before we had ever met. The members of the production team began to become increasingly present in our lives as well. Something like this would happen. We would be at a bar, when all of a sudden, Miranda and two other women from the podcast would show up. Sophia would light up, and I would disappear into thin air. In addition to discussing recent occurrences, they would also share stories about their own personal relationships. In each and every one of the stories, the protagonists eventually came to the conclusion that their lover was manipulative and left them. And then they would all praise each other as if fleeing was the only acceptable consequence for any connection that needed genuine work to be done. In that moment, I would sit there with a beer in my hand and watch Sophia laugh at their jokes and nod her head in agreement with their theories. To add insult to injury, I could sense her disappearing into this realm where I had already been found guilty of crimes that I had not committed. One evening, approximately 5 months into her employment at the podcast, we were meant to have dinner together, just the two of us. This was something that we hadn't done in weeks due to the fact that she was always either working late or meeting up with the production crew. After making reservations at this Italian restaurant that she adored, I arrived home early to change into my clothes. I just looked at her and said, "We'd had these plans for 3 weeks. And she got this expression as if I'd asked her to choose between me and her friends. And when she walked in, she immediately said, "Miranda and the team want to grab drinks tonight. Is it cool if we reschedule?" I just looked at her and said, "We'd had these plans for 3 weeks. For example, she remarked, "See, this is what they mean. You make me feel guilty for having a social life." I responded by telling her that the fact that we wanted to have one dinner together after scarcely seeing each other was not something that was making her feel guilty whatsoever. It was nothing more than the upkeep of a connection. However, she had previously texted them to let them know that she would be present. In the end, I went to the restaurant by myself, sat down at the table with 2 menus, and ate in silence as the waiter made a valiant effort to pretend that this was not a dismal experience. That was the night that I came to the realization that I was no longer dating Sophia. The podcast version of who they believed she ought to be was the person I was dating at the time. Moreover, that individual had already made the decision that I was the issue. On the other hand, I was still unaware of the most terrible aspect. I had no idea that our private talks, as well as my SMS messages and even my work schedule, had been turned into fodder for their group chat. Raw stuff that they were evaluating as if I were some type of case study in manipulative strategies. The fact that every word I said to her in private was being screenshotted and analyzed by individuals who had never spoken to me past surface-level small conversation at recordings was something I was completely unaware of. In addition, I was completely unaware that they were classifying everything into categories such as attempts to isolate themselves, guilt-tripping, and financial control. There was nothing else I was aware of but the fact that the lady I loved was vanishing and being replaced by someone who regarded me as a problem that needed to be handled rather than a partner with whom I could build a life. Even worse, I had no notion that things were about to turn even more dire. When I found out that they had been reading my private communications, it was such a bizarre experience that my brain almost refused to absorb it at first. A good example of this would be when you see something that is so wrong that it takes your mind a few seconds to catch up to what your eyes are presenting you. Sophia was taking a shower on a Tuesday evening when the event took place. The notifications on her iPad, which was sitting on the coffee table, were buzzing. And in a normal situation, I wouldn't even look at her electronic gadgets because I truly believed in the importance of privacy, in contrast to what appears to be the case with everyone else in her life. But the notification preview was right there on the lock screen, and it stated, "Miranda, clip 3 is perfect classic isolation phrase." My stomach fell because I knew precisely what clip 3 was. I was able to recognize it immediately. It was a voice message that I had given to Sophia 5 days previously, in which I expressed my desire to reserve a cabin in Blue Ridge for our second wedding anniversary. After picking up the iPad, I angled it, and it opened up without any problems. Moreover, the contents of the group chat that I was viewing, which was dubbed Sophia Support Squad and consisted of 15 people, including the entire podcast production team, caused me to have a physical sickness. Upon beginning to scroll up, I saw that my hands were shaking due to the fact that months' worth of our private discussions were just sitting there. There were screenshot after screenshot of text messages that I had given her, images of us together with annotations pointing out my body language, and voice recordings that I had recorded. When I was too weary to type, I was treated as if I were some kind of criminal suspect, and everything was probed and scrutinized. In the text I mentioned that I was working late on a security breach and that I was unable to prepare dinner because of my work schedule. I had recommended that we save money for a down payment rather than having a costly vacation, which was described as financial manipulation, controlling the narrative around their future. Miranda had wrote under it, "Notice the vague terminology, classic avoidance of real intimacy." There was also the message where I had suggested that we save money without taking an expensive vacation. In fact, there was a photograph that I had taken on a Saturday morning when I was preparing breakfast. In addition, it appears that my facial expression was dismissive because I was not smiling sufficiently. The fact that I had literally just woken up and hadn't had any coffee yet was completely irrelevant. Over the course of several months, each and every normal encounter that we had had with one another had been fed into this machine that transformed everyday occurrences in our relationship into evidence of poisonous behavior. And what made it much more difficult was the fact that Sophia's comments in the chat, in which she would offer context, were always done in a manner that made me appear even more unfavorable. She would write things like, "He says he's tired, but I think he just doesn't want to engage emotionally." Or, "He planned this whole trip without asking what I wanted." While the fact was that I had literally sent her 3 different cabin options and asked her to choose the one that she liked the most. The conversation went back 8 months, almost to the exact week that she had begun working at the podcast. I was able to observe the change in her vocabulary in real time as she went from supporting me to questioning everything that I did to eventually just accepting their interpretation of my actions without any resistance. One time, while I was in the middle of a business meeting, I sent her a text message in which I expressed my desire to be at home and how much I missed her. Simply a sweet and unremarkable message. And a person by the name of Lily had reacted in the group chat saying, "Love bombing after a period of emotional distance. Textbook cycle." Sophia had responded with an emoji of thought rather than informing them that they were mad. While I was sitting on the couch, I read through the months of my life that were being transformed into fodder for individuals who appeared to sincerely believe that any man who was not performing happiness every second was secretly abusive. The most frustrating aspect was that I was unable to even feel rage because it would only serve to demonstrate their thesis. I was aware that I had approximately 3 minutes before Sophia emerged from the shower when I heard the shower turn off. Consequently, I obtained screenshots of everything, emailed them to myself, removed the fragrance messages from her iPad, and then returned it to the exact same location it had been in before. When she came into the living room wearing her bathrobe and asked me what I wanted for supper, my hands were still shaking. I just looked at her and said that we needed to have a conversation about privacy and limits. Moreover, I observed her facial expression transform into one of defensiveness before I had even finished explaining what I really meant. The moment she asked me if I had gone through her phone, I responded by saying that I had not. I became concerned when I noticed a notification on her iPad, and she quickly snatched it off the table as if I had threatened to destroy it. She became very still when I asked her directly if she had been sharing our private chats with the podcast team, and that stillness told me everything before she ever opened her mouth. I asked her if she had been sharing our conversations publicly. I was able to recognize patterns that I was unable to recognize on my own, according to her. And when I asked her what patterns exactly she was referring to, she began naming things in a manner that was completely prepared and did not sound anything like her speaking voice. She stated that I had a pattern of making plans without consulting her, that I used work as an excuse to avoid having emotional conversations, and that I made her feel bad for spending time with friends. Each and every one of these statements was something that I had heard them record in a podcast episode. She was unable to provide me with any concrete instances at all, including dates and circumstances when I asked her for them. She just kept talking in these broad generalizations about patterns, red flags, and things that sounded manipulative, even if she was unable to articulate why she was doing it. I explained to her that it was a serious breach of privacy for her to transmit my voice notes and text messages to a dozen unknown individuals without first obtaining my permission. It was not merely a sensation. Rather, it was a distinct event that took place. And she responded by saying, "Miranda says, your wording is manipulative." That was as if she was responding to something. I was just staring at her since I suddenly became aware that I was no longer communicating with my partner at that precise time. It was a committee that I was speaking to. In a case for which I was not even aware that I was being tried, every single word that I uttered was going to be recorded back, examined, and used as evidence. She continued, telling me that the group chat was a secure environment for her to express her thoughts, which I was unable to comprehend because I had never been gaslit in a relationship before, just as she had been on previous occasions. It was also important to me to emphasize that I had been present for each and every tale that she told about her tough ex-boyfriend, but I had never once divulged those private moments to anybody else. However, there was no use in bothering her because she had already made up her mind that my request of basic privacy was nothing more than an additional form of control, an additional warning sign, and yet another reason why they were correct all along about me. I inquired as to whether or not she became aware of the fact that everything I disclosed to her in confidence, every vulnerable moment, and every private thought was now being used as entertainment for individuals who were unfamiliar with me and had already made the decision that I was the antagonist. I responded by telling her that a support system does not include the use of screenshots and forensic study of text messages. She responded by saying, "They are not strangers. They are my support system. It requires trust and actual conversation to be successful." And she looked at me with this attitude that was nothing more than pure podcast hyperbole, and she said, "You're just upset because you can't control the narrative anymore." 20 minutes passed, during which the conversation continued to go in circles. Although I was attempting to convey that privacy is not the same thing as control, she continued to speak in language that were copied from other people. Eventually I just stopped talking because I recognized that nothing I said would matter. She had been immersed in this milieu for such a long time, where every guy was a suspect and every barrier was an imposition, that she was unable to see how totally irrational it was to treat your spouse as if they were a research subject. On that particular night, I was unable to bear to remain in close proximity to her, so I went to sleep in the spare room. As I lay there in the darkness, I reflected on the fact that virtually every word I had spoken that evening had probably already been put up in that group chat, along with commentary about my defensive behavior and my reluctance to accept responsibility for my actions. I reflected on all of the instances that I had helped her feel better when she was feeling anxious. I did everything I could to make her life easier, even the smallest things. All of the ways in which I had regularly and dependably appeared, and how none of that mattered because it was not sufficiently performative for an audience that required me to be a villain. She had already left by the time I got up the following morning. And at approximately midday, I received a text message that simply stated, "We need to talk." You don't organize a breakup conversation at a public place unless you want witnesses or you're terrified of the other person's reaction. Riverside Bistro at 7 o'clock in the evening. I knew full well what was going to happen because I knew exactly what was going to happen. I responded to the text with a yes, and then I spent the rest of the day working from home, finishing off a security audit, and making sure that my professional life was strong. I did this because I knew that my personal life was going to collapse, and I needed at least one element of my life to be stable. I hadn't been angry for a while. I didn't even come close to being wounded. In my own relationship, I had been treated like a suspect for several months, and I was just fatigued from the experience. Furthermore, to tell you the truth, a portion of me felt pleased that everything was going to be over at last. Due to the fact that being late would definitely be another red flag, I arrived at Riverside Bistro at 6:55. In addition, Sophia was already present at a table in the corner of the pub, where she was accompanied by 3 of her podcast friends who were acting as if they were not watching. Moreover, I came to the realization that this was not going to be a conversation at all. A performance was about to take place, and the audience was going to be ready to approve of whatever she had to say. As soon as I sat down at the table in the corner opposite Sophia, I observed that she was holding note cards in front of her. In the event that she was about to give a presentation, she was using actual physical note cards. It was at that moment that I realized that this was not going to be a genuine chat. It was before I had even placed my drink order that she began talking. She told me that she had been doing a lot of introspection and that she had realized that our connection had become harmful for her development. She did this while using the same therapy speak voice that had supplanted her own personality. I did nothing but listen and observe as she glanced down at the cards, which she did every few seconds. I urged her to provide me with a concrete example of something unhealthy that I had done when she reached a gap in her conversation. Within the span of a single actual moment with context, she appeared to be becoming increasingly irritated as she fumbled through her cards. She complained that things did not feel right, that the dynamic was not right, and that she had been walking on eggshells. However, when I inquired about the precise time when she had experienced that emotion, she was unable to provide an explanation. Instead, she persisted in referring to sensations, patterns, and things that Miranda had assisted her in recognizing. At the bar, I could see her pals leaning in an attempt to hear what she had to say. And then I realized that they had most likely assisted in the writing of those cards, and that they had most likely spent a significant amount of time developing this script for her to follow. At the end of the day, she just stated what she had most likely intended to say from the very beginning. During the passage in which she mentioned that her friends believed that I restricted her, I experienced a strange sense of tranquility because I realized that we were finally getting to the truth. I inquired as to whether the opinions of her friends were more significant than her own personal experience with our connection. They were able to see things that she was unable to see, she said. At that moment I realized that there was no longer any relationship that could be saved. I turned to her and said, "Cool. Then go join them." The expression on her face was one of complete surprise. It appeared as though she had anticipated that I would beg, fight, or give her the big show that they had presumably thought I would make. I could feel her friends in the bar staring at me, and you could tell that they had completely stopped talking. And Sophia just sat there, opening and closing her mouth, trying to figure out what to say now that her screenplay had not taken into consideration me, and she was simply agreeing with me. After pulling out my wallet, I placed a $50 bill for the beverages that neither of us had consumed, and I expressed my wish that she would find whatever it was that she was looking for. After that I got to my feet, went by her buddies without even giving them a glance, and exited the pub feeling lighter than I had in months since the act was finally finished. As a result of the fact that I approach issues in this manner, the subsequent few days were mechanical and efficient. I devise a strategy and then execute it. All of her belongings from my apartment, including every article of clothing, every book, and every other miscellaneous item that she had left lying around for the past 3 years, were packed up to be moved. And then I put everything in a box and placed it in the lobby of the building, along with a text message informing her of the time when she could pick it up. I blocked her number, blocked her on every social media platform, blocked her friends, and blocked anyone involved with that show. I did all of this without getting angry or causing any controversy because I had just finished providing them with stuff to study. She attempted to call me from a variety of numbers, but I never picked up the phone. I did not read the emails that she sent me, so I erased them. However, she arrived at my apartment building 4 days after the bar, despite the fact that I had already instructed the front desk staff not to let her up. When I answered the phone, I could hear the security guard saying, "I just want to talk." I could hear her in the background. In addition, I instructed them to let her know that all of her stuff had already been gathered, and that there was nothing further for us to talk about. It was a week later when my coworker asked me why I appeared to be so much more calm, and I understood that it was because I was no longer being monitored from that point on. There was no doubt in my mind about every single word I said or every single choice I made. Is not now residing in a relationship that has evolved into a state of constant observation. It was then that I resumed attending to the gym. I re-established contact with friends that I had been neglecting. During the process of picking up a project automobile that I had been wanting to work on, I also generally recalled what it was like to live my life without someone documenting my every action for an audience of criticism. Approximately 2 months after the split, a buddy of mine sent me a link to an episode of a podcast that was titled "When You're the Red Flag." I was aware of the fact that it was about me right away, despite the fact that they did not use my name. I listened to everything that was said, and it was a strange experience to hear Sophia describe our relationship as an oppressive environment in which I had controlled her schedule, separated her from her friends, and caused her to question her own reality, all of which had not actually occurred. They portrayed me as a master manipulator who had been so subtle about my strategies that even I was unaware that I was engaging in such behavior and manipulating others. In addition, the comment section was dominated by individuals who lauded Sophia for her escape and referred to me by every name that could possibly come to mind. Specifically, it wasn't the lies that were bothering me to begin with. It was the number of people who believed them without any more inquiry. How willing were people to acknowledge that any relationship that ended must have been unhealthy for both parties involved? And it was certain that any individual who appeared to be tranquil was concealing something nefarious. On the other hand, here is something that they did not anticipate. significantly more than their typical fare. The program was a huge success. Furthermore, all of a sudden, others who were familiar with me began to recognize the story. In fact, the human resources department of my firm came out to me after receiving the episode and inquiring as to whether or not they were aware that one of their employees was being accused of manipulating a podcast. I was required to provide an explanation for the entire situation by utilizing screenshots of the group chat that I had preserved. In a private message, former co-workers, mutual friends, and even Sophia's own cousin expressed their awareness that the podcast version did not accurately reflect the reality of the situation. And slowly, this counter-narrative began to form in the comments, where people pointed out that every example she presented was either absolutely normal conduct or didn't truly represent what she said it showed, since it was either completely normal or completely normal behavior. At the same time as people were going back through old episodes of the podcast and realizing that practically every tale followed the same pattern of converting regular relationship dynamics into manipulation storylines, advertisers began quietly withdrawing their support for the show. This caused the reputation of the podcast to begin to suffer. Not a single one of it involved me in any way. On the other hand, I did not publicly defend myself or add fuel to the flames. While I concentrated on actually living my life, I decided to just let the truth speak for itself. A message from Sophia arrived in my inbox 8 months after everything had collapsed. Just a message that said, "You weren't toxic. I'm sorry I let them convince me that you were." There was no subject line. In addition, I stared at it for a considerable amount of time before shutting it without providing a response, since I was at a loss for words. You can't reverse months of deception and violation by simply saying sorry. Neither does it change the fact that she prioritized the views of strangers over her own personal experience. She was willing to ruin me in order to fit into a group that required everyone to have a villain origin tale. This does not change the fact that she was willing to do it. I'm currently dating a new individual, a software engineer whom I met through friends. He is someone who thinks the whole podcast cult thing is absurd, and who actually talks like a real person rather than reading from a script. When we have arguments, we talk through the issues rather than recording them as proof. This is a regular part of our relationship. And when she tells her friends about me, it is not because she needs them to verify her reality, but rather because she wants to share her life with them. The only thing that can be done in response to someone who treats you like a character in their story rather than a real person is to step off their stage and let them perform for an empty room. This is something that I have learned. Miranda wrote some non-apology about learning and developing, which ultimately led to the cancellation of the program, which had been dumped by several sponsors on multiple occasions. And I learned about Sophia's departure from the production firm from our shared friends, that she relocated to a different city in order to begin a new chapter in her life. I do not despise her, and I do not waste time thinking about getting vengeance on her because, to tell you the truth, she gave me the best gift of all time, which was demonstrating to me exactly who I should not waste my time on. And at this point, all I want to do is concentrate on constructing a life with someone who views partnership as a form of cooperation rather than the production of material. My sister and fiancé planned for 7 months to steal my $23,000 savings and humiliate me in front of 200 guests. But karma came faster than expected. My sister borrowed my clothes, my friends, and finally my men. When I was 16, she persuaded my crush, Zach Moreno, to accompany her to prom instead of me by claiming I had been talking about another boy. When I was 22, Mom moved in with my college boyfriend Ryan while I was studying abroad in Italy, claiming she was helping him deal with depression after his father died. My parents repeatedly defended her with the same stale excuses. "Vanessa doesn't mean to hurt you," Mom would say, stroking my hair as I grieved. "She just has a magnetic personality. People are drawn to her." "Your sister's not malicious," Dad would say. "She's just young and doesn't think things through." But Vanessa was always thinking things thoroughly. I discovered her diary at the age of 15, which contained comprehensive plans for snatching my friends, opportunities, and life. She wrote about Zach. "Lauren is so boring. I bet I could persuade him to notice me in a single chat." Regarding Ryan, "He's too wonderful for Lauren anyway. She does not appreciate what she has." But I believed Ethan Ward was different. We'd been together 4 years and engaged for 8 months. We'd met in a restaurant where I was working as a waitress to pay for nursing school, and he was a line cook with greater goals than money. Ethan enjoyed how I made him laugh during his biggest kitchen disasters, like scraping scorched sauce off pots at 2 a.m. He practiced new recipes. He appreciated how I supported his goal of launching a restaurant by putting my whole savings account, $23,000, to his business plan when banks refused to lend him money. He appreciated how I believed in him after his own family labeled him a failure for dropping out of college to go culinary school. Ethan had already witnessed Vanessa's manipulation of men. He'd been there during family dinners when she'd openly flirt with my high school boyfriend Brandon, right in front of me, only to claim she was just being polite when confronted. He'd rolled his eyes at her wedding dress shopping advice. "Lauren's very practical, but wouldn't something more form-fitting be better? You want Ethan to feel aroused, not comfy?" He'd laughed when she accidentally poured red wine on my engagement photos at last year's Christmas party, claiming the lighting made me seem washed out and offering to reshoot them with her photographer friend. "Your sister is exhausting," he informed me after the party. "I don't know how you put up with her constant drama." I defended Vanessa as I usually do. "She intends well, she just does not have a filter." The rehearsal dinner was excellent. We had reserved a private dining room at Bella Vista, the restaurant where Ethan and I had our first formal date. 50 of our closest family and friends packed the room with laughter and champagne toasts. Ethan grabbed my hand beneath the table as my father delivered his speech about finding your person, how glad he was to welcome Ethan into our family, and how he'd seen Ethan grow from a struggling cook to a man deserving of his daughter's love. Vanessa sat across from us, stunning in her sapphire bridesmaid dress, which cost me $400, toasting our pleasure with champagne, and that smile I'd known my entire life. She had insisted on sitting right across from Ethan, insisting it was the perfect location for shots. Throughout dinner, she'd lean forward when Ethan talked, laugh a bit too loudly at his jokes, and touch his arm when discussing the wedding. "She's just excited for you," Ethan said quietly as I noticed her actions. "Vanessa's always been dramatic." Vanessa stood with tears in her eyes during the maid of honor speech, gripping the microphone as if she were addressing the United Nations. "Lauren has always been my role model," she explained, her voice breaking with genuine passion. "She's taught me about loyalty and the importance of always supporting those you care about. When Ethan entered her life, I witnessed my sister become the happiest version of herself. Ethan, you're getting someone who will fight for your dreams and support you no matter what. Lauren, you are getting someone who recognizes your brilliance." She raised her glass with trembling hand. "To Lauren and Ethan, may you always choose each other first, no matter what challenges come your way." The room erupted with applause. Ethan stroked my cheek and whispered, "Your sister really loves you." I felt awful about ever doubting Vanessa's intentions. 2 nights later, I was unable to sleep. Wedding nerves, I mused. Our big day was in 18 hours. I'd previously laid out my dress, a vintage-inspired A-line with hand-sewn pearls that my grandmother wore in 1952. I confirmed the final head count with the caterer, 147 people, double-checked that the rings were safely tucked in Ethan's best man's pocket, and informed the photographer about the special shot with my parents' wedding bands next to ours. My phone had alarms set for every hour to remind me to drink water and eat something. At 5 a.m., I gave up on sleeping and decided to surprise Ethan with coffee at his apartment on our last morning as an unmarried couple. I had gotten him his favorite dark roast from the 24-hour cafe and some fresh bagels. My key turned in his lock as it had hundreds of times before, the same lock I'd assisted him in installing when he moved into the one-bedroom flat above Mrs. Lou's flower store. I found them in his bed. My sister, my fiancée. The white silk lingerie I'd purchased for our honeymoon, $300 in delicate lace from the boutique Vanessa recommended, tangled around her ankles. The engagement ring, which I had watched him save for over 8 months while working double shifts, shone on the nightstand next to empty champagne glasses and what appeared to be leftover takeout from Russo's, the Italian restaurant where we had celebrated our 6-month anniversary. Vanessa saw me first. Instead of embarrassment or astonishment, I noticed triumph in her eyes. She had been waiting and planning for this time. "I was going to tell you," she continued, gently rising up and not trying to cover herself. Ethan realized he chose the wrong sister. Ethan hurried for his boxers, stammering apologies for what had just happened, for being confused, and for still loving me. His face was flushed with embarrassment and worry, sweat dripping on his brow as he sought to find words to express what I was experiencing. "Cla, this isn't what it looks like," he added, the most cliché lie imaginable. But Vanessa interrupted him with a laugh that chilled my blood. She laughed the same way she had when she told our parents that I had broken Mom's antique vase when we were 12. The laugh indicated that she had won again. "Stop pretending to be sorry, Ethan. We had been planning this for months. Tell her about your hotel room in Vegas when you attended that restaurant conference. Tell her about Christmas and how you shouted my name in your sleep. Tell her about last week when you mentioned you wished you had met me first." My knees nearly buckled. The Vegas conference was in March, 7 months ago. Vanessa had remained in the guest room next to us at my parents' house for Christmas. Last week, Ethan seemed aloof and reported work stress. "Tell her about the loan," Vanessa said, her voice becoming stronger and more confident. "Tell her how you're planning to use her savings to open a restaurant with me instead." The room swirled. My $23,000. The money I'd saved by working 60-hour weeks as a nursing assistant, picking up extra shifts over the holidays, and foregoing meals to save every penny. The money that was going to go towards our dream restaurant, Ward's Place. "Vanessa, stop," Ethan murmured softly, but she was on a roll now. "Tell her about the apartment we viewed at last week. The one with the large kitchen and garden view. Tell her how we plan to depart shortly after the wedding, take her money, and start over in Portland." Portland. Ethan mentioned Portland recently, claiming that a chef buddy had offered him a position there. I had urged him to think about it, thinking it would be beneficial for us to start over somewhere new. They planned my humiliation for months, while I was arranging flowers and scheduling cake tastings, mailing save the dates and picking centerpieces, verifying RSVPs, and finalizing seating charts. Ethan claimed he worked late nights at the restaurant and came home smelling like perfume from the female waiters. Vanessa canceled our sisterly shopping trips because she had a date with someone she couldn't tell me about yet. They'd both been so helpful with wedding planning, insisting on hiring the photographer and videographer themselves because they had connections who could save us money. "We chose Sophie Allen," Vanessa had stated of the photographer. "She's amazing at candid pictures. She will catch every moment." Now I understand why. I walked away without speaking. They were still yelling my name as I descended the small steps, Ethan's voice breaking as he begged me to listen, and Vanessa's shrill and demanding as she implored him to leave me go. "Dear Claire, please," Ethan shouted from his window as I got into my car. "Let me explain." I drove slowly away, observing him in my rearview mirror as he stood half-naked at his window, obviously aware that his life was about to implode. For the next 6 hours, I sat in my car at Sunset Beach, where Ethan had proposed 13 months before. He had arranged an extravagant sunset picnic, complete with my favorite Thai food and a playlist of music that were meaningful to our relationship. When he got down on one knee, he talked about starting a life together, about how I was his closest friend and future all in one. "I can't imagine doing any of this without you," he exclaimed, shaking his hands as he opened the ring box. "You make me better at everything." I should have cried, called my parents and canceled vendors. Instead I felt something cold and calculating creep into my chest. Vanessa had taken everything from me since we were kids, and I had always forgiven her because family was supposed to forgive. This time though, things were different. This wasn't a borrowed garment or a stolen boyfriend, it was my future, money and existence, which she had plotted to destroy. I drove home around 11 a.m. I discovered my parents in the kitchen, frantically calling vendors to cancel the wedding. Mom was sobbing after a talk with the florist about losing her deposit. Dad appeared 10 years older, with scruffy hair, as he complained with the caterer about their cancellation policy. "Sweetheart," Mom exclaimed when she spotted me, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Ethan called." He explained the confusion to Vanessa. "He claims it's only cold feet. These things happen to couples before major commitments. Maybe you two can figure it out if you just talk about it." Even now they were on his side. Vanessa was their lovely kid who could do no wrong, and Ethan felt like family after 4 years. I was simply the hurt party who needed to be more understanding. "There's no confusion," I stated calmly, placing my purse on the counter. "The wedding is still happening tomorrow, just not the way anyone expects." My parents exchanged concerned glances. Dad cleared his throat. "Honey, perhaps you're in shock. This is a lot to process. Why don't you sit down and we can figure out how to proceed?" "I'm not in shock," I murmured, pouring myself a glass of water with steady fingers. "I am thinking clearly for the first time in months." And I answered, "The wedding is still happening." I secluded myself in my childhood bedroom and began to work. First, I contacted my cousin Lucas, who worked in IT security for a company that protected celebrities from stalkers and corporate espionage. Lucas had always been my favorite relative. He was 3 years older, incredibly smart, and had never succumbed to Vanessa's manipulation. When we were youngsters, he was the only one who confronted Mom when she lied about damaging items or stealing money from our grandmother's purse. "I need a favor," I replied when he responded. "Remember when you said I could ask for anything after I assisted you with your divorce?" Lucas's ex-wife had attempted to take him for everything, including his dog and his grandmother's wedding band. I'd spent 3 months assisting him in documenting her affair and attempts to hide assets. When the divorce was finalized, he received full custody of his dog and kept everything she attempted to steal. "Name it," he exclaimed immediately. I explained the situation, the affair, the money, and the planned betrayal. Lucas listened without interrupting, occasionally emitting nasty grunts. "Those pieces of shit," he remarked as I finished. "What do you need?" Lucas has designed security systems for famous weddings, set hidden cameras in offices for business investigations, and assisted numerous friends in gathering evidence against cheating spouses. He understood the concept of prudence. Most importantly, he knew revenge. "I need to know everything," I explained. "How long this has been going on, what they've been planning, whether there are others involved, and I need it documented in a way that can't be questioned or denied." "Give me Ethan's address and phone number," Lucas asked. "I can place micro cameras in his apartment within 2 hours. His phone can be cloned if I have physical access for 30 seconds. How technical would you like to get?" "As technical as necessary. And Lucas, I need this done legitimately. Everything must be allowed if it comes to that." "Leave it to me. Ethan's apartment building does not have security cameras, correct? And his lease most likely includes conventional language granting management access for maintenance. I'll pretend to be a cable repairman. Half of the buildings in that neighborhood have been experiencing internet problems this week." Next, I called Sophie Allen, the wedding photographer Vanessa had personally suggested. Sophie specialized in candid moments and had an amazing portfolio of photographing genuine emotions at weddings. Her website included comments from brides who praised her ability to capture the real story of their big day. "Sophie, this is Claire Hayes. You are photographing my wedding tomorrow." "Oh my God, Claire, I am so excited. Vanessa has told me so much about you. Are you feeling nervous about your upcoming wedding? You sound a little stressed." "Interesting," Vanessa informed her about me. "Actually, I'm phoning because our plans have changed. I have a pretty particular shot list for tomorrow, and I need to know if you're willing to capture some unexpected moments." "Of course. I take satisfaction in getting photos that other photographers miss. What did you have in mind?" "I need you to record everything that happens tomorrow. Everything. Even if it appears improper or awkward. Particularly if it appears incorrect or uncomfortable. Can you do that?" There was a pause. "Vanessa said that you might want some dramatic photos. She mentioned that you enjoy telling truthful stories. I'm completely on board. Should I bring additional memory cards?" Vanessa had been planning this for a while, arranging for a buddy to capture my humiliation. "Perfect. Bring everything you own. And Sophie, there may be some video components to tomorrow's event. Do you feel comfortable with live streaming?" "Absolutely. I do a lot of social media integrations. Will this appear on Instagram Stories or Facebook Live?" "Something like that. One more thing. I need you to keep this conversation between us. The surprise elements will not function if word spreads. Your secrets are safe with me. Vanessa always claimed you were more inventive than others gave you credit for." After I hung up, I sat there staring at my phone. Vanessa had been planning this humiliation for months, arranging for her photographer buddy to capture my breakdown. She presumably envisaged viral recordings of me sobbing at the altar, content that would stick with me forever. Then I made the hardest decision of all. "Mrs. Ward," I responded when Ethan's mother answered the second call. "This is Lauren. I want to tell you something essential concerning tomorrow's wedding." Patricia, Ethan's mother, had never liked Vanessa. She dubbed her, "that manipulative little peacock," after Vanessa brazenly flirted with Ethan's married brother at our engagement party, including hair flipping and inappropriate touching while his wife was in the toilet. Mrs. Ward was a traditional Baptist, with strong beliefs about moral behavior and women who hurled themselves at taken men. "What is wrong, my dear?" she inquired instantly, picking up on my tone. "You sound upset." I told her everything, about how they met, about the months of falsehoods, about how they planned to embarrass me at my own wedding and steal my funds, about the Portland apartment and the restaurant they intended to start with my money. The pause was so long that I assumed she'd hung up. I could hear her breathing, short and sharp, as if she was attempting to contain herself. "Those sinful children," she eventually said quietly, her voice quivering with wrath. "After everything you've done for that boy. After you supported him through culinary school, after you." When Ethan's father labeled him useless, he was especially harsh during family dinners, continually comparing Ethan to his prosperous older brother, who worked in finance. I had spent countless evenings rebuilding Ethan after his father had torn him down. "Mrs. Ward, I have a plan," I explained, "but I need your help." Sweetheart, tell me what you need. That boy has been destined for a fall his entire life, and Vanessa is the type of lady who will pull him straight to hell. Mrs. Ward has waited 30 years to replace someone like Vanessa. She grew up in a small southern village where women who stole other women's husbands were punished harshly and publicly. She recognized the importance of a good old-fashioned reckoning. I outlined my plan. Mrs. Ward listened and occasionally made approving sounds. Are you sure this is legal? She inquired when I had finished. Lucas is managing the technical aspects. Everything will be documented correctly. And legally, all I'm doing is allowing the truth to be revealed, at my own wedding. Good. Ethan must learn that his actions have consequences, and Vanessa must grasp that not everyone will just give her what she wants. There's one more thing, I explained. I need you to ensure that Ethan comes up tomorrow. If he tries to run or cancel, this will not work. Oh, he'll be there, Mrs. Ward stated coldly. I will make sure of it. That boy owes you an explanation, in front of everyone who has come to support your relationship. The least he could do is face the music. I awoke at 6 a.m. on my wedding day, feeling more tranquil than I have in months. My phone was already humming with texts, bridesmaids inquiring about timing, suppliers checking specifics, and relatives requesting directions to the chapel. Vanessa texted me at 6:15. Ethan told me everything. I'm very sorry, sis. I never intended for this to happen. Can we speak before the ceremony? I need to explain. I stared at the message for an entire minute. Even now she was lying, attempting to mislead me one more time, possibly convincing me to gently cancel everything and slink away as she and Ethan rode off into the sunset with my money. I replied, of course. See you at church. We will have plenty of time to discuss. She had no idea I spent the night perfecting every aspect for her special day. Lucas had texted me at 3 a.m. Package delivered. Everything is in place. You're going to adore the supplementary footage. Supplementary film meant he'd discovered more than I had anticipated. Vanessa and Ethan had undoubtedly been careless, believing they were safe after the ceremony was finished. My hair and makeup team arrived at 8 a.m. I kept the original appointments, informing them that there had been some adjustments, but that we would proceed as planned. Tara, my makeup artist, observed my calm mood. You seem really zen for a bride, she commented as she applied my foundation. Usually by now, brides are crying or yelling or both. I'm exactly where I need to be, I said. Which was true. At 10 a.m., I arrived at St. Mary's Catholic Church wearing my bridal gown. The guests were already arriving. 200 people who had taken time off work, purchased gifts, reserved hotel rooms, and traveled from as far away as California to celebrate what they hoped would be my happily ever after. I saw Ethan's college roommates in the parking lot, laughing and fixing their ties. My nursing school friends gathered around the door, enjoying the flower arrangements I had spent months choosing. Vanessa waited in the bridal room, dressed in the sapphire bridesmaid dress I had purchased for $400. She appeared nervous for the first time in her life, messing with her hair and obsessively checking her mirror. When I went in, she leapt up, as if she had been caught doing something wrong. Lauren, I need to explain. No explanation needed, I remarked, gently fixing her hair. You want Ethan, you can have him. Her face lit up with relief and victory, the same smile she used when she persuaded our parents to let her keep my bedroom when I left for college. Really? Are you not mad? How can I be mad? I smiled serenely. You are my sister. If you believe Ethan is your soulmate, who am I to stand in the way of genuine love? Vanessa absolutely sparkled. She'd gotten everything she wanted without facing any consequences, again. In her mind, I was the same pushover sister who always gave in when she wanted anything. You're being so mature about this, she added, hugging me gently to prevent smudging our makeup. I was worried you'd make a scene. Me? Create a scene? I laughed. When have I ever caused a scene? Never, she replied swiftly. You've always been quite sensible. That's why Ethan and I expected you to understand eventually. There's only one minor change to the ceremony, I replied nonchalantly, helping her touch up her lipstick. Since you two are so in love, I thought you should be the one to walk down the aisle today. Vanessa's eyes widened. What do you mean? I've arranged for you to marry Ethan instead, right now, in front of everyone. Her face lost its color. Lauren, we can't just... Why not? You adore him, and he loves you. Everyone's already arrived. The flowers are paid for, the cake is ready, the photographer is set up, and I've arranged for a very unique documentation of your big day. I could see her thoughts racing. This was not how she had intended to kidnap my fiancé. She planned to do it slowly and deliberately, portraying herself as an innocent victim carried away by unexpected love. She wished to be the tragic heroine of a romance tale, not the homewrecker who ruined her sister's wedding. "But what are you going to tell everyone?" she inquired softly. "The truth," I replied simply. "That my sister and my fiancé found their soulmate in each other. That I'm stepping aside for true love. That everyone should witness the beginning of your beautiful life together." Vanessa realized she was stuck. If she refused, she'd come across as a manipulative homewrecker. If she accepted, she'd be married to Ethan before she could consider the ramifications. And walking back now would mean explaining to 200 guests why she couldn't marry the man she'd been having an affair with for months. "Where's Ethan?" she inquired, her voice barely above a whisper. "Get ready in the men's suite. He's very pleased to marry you, Vanessa. He continued saying that you are everything he has ever desired in a woman." It was a lie. Ethan had spent the morning texting me furiously, begging to talk, and swearing that everything was a mistake. He made 17 calls between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. Before, I had banned his phone number. I forwarded all of his texts to Vanessa instead, with the following note. "Your groom seemed apprehensive. Perhaps you should soothe him." Vanessa stood at the back of St. Mary's in a hastily changed wedding dress borrowed from our cousin Hannah, who happened to be the same size and had brought her dress for photos. The assembly mumbled in uncertainty as Pastor Green approached the microphone. Due to unexpected circumstances, Pastor Green carefully read from the script I'd given him. "We're celebrating the union of Ethan Ward and Vanessa Hayes today, instead of Lauren Hayes and Ethan Ward." The murmurs became louder. I sat in the front row, near to my parents, who were ashamed and perplexed. Dad continued whispering frantic inquiries, which I answered with calm smiles and vague statements about love finding a way. Vanessa's grin was brittle as she proceeded down the aisle toward Ethan, who stood at the altar looking like he was about to vomit. He kept looking at me urgently, perhaps hoping I'd halt this lunacy. The organist played "Here Comes the Bride" as the congregation witnessed the oddest wedding ceremony they'd ever seen. Sophie, the photographer, snapped away excitedly, exactly as I had ordered. She'd placed herself ideally to capture both Vanessa's fake smile and Ethan's obvious sadness. When Pastor Green asked if anyone was opposed to the union, I could feel 200 pairs of eyes on me. The hush lasted for what seemed like hours. I smiled calmly and offered a modest, supportive nod for the ritual to proceed. "Ethan," Pastor Green asked, examining his notes, "do you consider Vanessa to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live?" Ethan looked at me once more, his eyes begging. I kept my tranquil expression. He had no option now. His mother was staring at him from the second row, and 200 guests were waiting for his response. Vanessa gripped his hands so firmly that her knuckles became white. "I do," he croaked. "Vanessa, do you consider Ethan to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to retain, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both live?" Vanessa paused for a moment, possibly thinking that, "for richer or poorer," would not work out as she had anticipated, but she lifted her chin proudly, giving the performance of her life. "I do." "You may kiss the bride." The kiss was awkward and fleeting, more like a peck than a passionate hug. Sophie got everything, including the wedding party's uncomfortable expressions and the guests' bewildered remarks. During the cocktail hour, I played the ideal gracious sister. I strolled through the gathering, explaining that love had simply taken a different road, that I was overjoyed to see my sister and Ethan together, and that sometimes the universe had other plans than ours. "You're handling this so well," said Mrs. Liu, Ethan's elderly neighbor who had known him when he moved into the apartment above her flower store. "Most women would be devastated." "Vanessa and Ethan belong together," I replied, smiling serenely. "I can see it now. Sometimes it takes a dramatic occasion to disclose the truth." Ethan's college mates appeared perplexed, but went along with it. Vanessa's sorority sisters felt thrilled with what they viewed as a romantic twist fit for a reality TV show. The older relatives spoke among themselves, evidently astonished but not wanting to create a disturbance. Vanessa and Ethan sat at the head table for supper, looking increasingly uncomfortable as reality struck in. They married each other without a prenup in front of everyone they knew. Ethan constantly checking his phone, most likely hunting for an escape route that did not exist. Vanessa kept her beautiful grin, but I could see terror developing in her eyes. The dinner was exactly what I had planned for my wedding to Ethan: salmon with lemon caper sauce, roasted veggies, and wild rice pilaf. The cake remained the three-tiered vanilla and raspberry masterpiece I had spent hours crafting with the baker. Even the flowers I chose, white roses and baby's breath, reminded me of my grandmother's garden. Everything was perfect for Vanessa's big day. That's when I stood up and revealed my wedding gift. "Before we cut the cake," I said, striking my champagne glass with a silver knife, "I have a special surprise for the happy couple." The room became quiet as the visitors focused their attention on me. Vanessa and Ethan looked perplexed, but hopeful, as if I was ready to deliver a tearful speech about stepping aside for true love. "As most of you know," I said, "Vanessa and Ethan's love story has been blossoming for a long time. I felt it would be great to share that journey with you all." The lights darkened, and a giant screen fell from the ceiling, the same one we had leased for a display of childhood memories and love moments. Lucas had positioned himself at a corner table, laptop open and ready to begin the presentation. "Sophie has done an amazing job documenting their relationship," I added, nodding at the photographer who was still taking pictures. "But today, I want to share some earlier footage that really captures the depth of their connection." The video begins with Vanessa and Ethan in bed together at his apartment, 3 months prior to the incident. Lucas's covert cameras had filmed everything in crystal clear high definition. The video showed them joking about how naive I was as they planned their strategy for breaking up with me after the wedding. "Lauren's always been so trusting," Vanessa commented in the video while lying naked on my fiancé's bed. "She has no idea we've been planning this since March." The room went completely silent. 200 shocked visitors took a collective breath in. "Tell me again about the money," Ethan murmured on television, stroking his hands down Vanessa's body. 23,000. She had been saving for years. "She won't be able to touch it until we get married and move to Portland. We'll have enough to open the restaurant and leave before she can do anything about it." The video continued, months of planning. While Vanessa tried on my wedding dress at his apartment, Ethan practiced his breakup speech. Vanessa calculated how much money they'd save by retaining all of the wedding vendors I'd already paid. Ethan mentioned how simple it would be to trick me into signing over power of attorney for the restaurant business. Vanessa was on the phone with someone a week ago, and she said, "Lauren's always been pathetic. She'll undoubtedly beg Ethan to take her back after the wedding, but we'll have already left. She lacks the courage to fight for anything." 200 guests stared in startled silence as the reality unfolded on the screen in painful detail. Ethan's mother rose up and left halfway through, her face contorted with disgust. My parents sat transfixed with fear. Vanessa's sorority sisters were shooting everything with their phones and most likely publishing it on social media. When the movie concluded, I stood up with the microphone, my face calm and pleasant. "Surprise," I exclaimed happily. "I thought everyone should know what kind of love story they were celebrating today." The room erupted. Guests began to stand and leave, with some throwing their napkins on their tables in disgust. Ethan's groomsmen seemed ready to fight him. Vanessa covered her face in her hands as her new mother-in-law's acquaintances walked by, grumbling about moral decay and the decline of family values. But I wasn't done. "One more gift," I said as turmoil erupted around us. Lucas rose from his corner table and nodded. Every phone in the room received the same text message, a link to a private website where the complete video was released, as well as screenshots of Ethan and Vanessa's text chats plotting my humiliation and their financial treachery. "Just so everyone can remember this special day," I added pleasantly. "The website has all of Lucas's footage from the past week, including some nice chats about how they want to disappear to Portland with my life savings. Vanessa, dear, you might want to examine your social media. I have already tagged everyone we know," Vanessa shouted as she looked at her phone. The video was being shared on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok quicker than she could erase notifications. Lucas had made it impossible to erase by uploading it to many platforms at once and sending it to every gossip blog and local news station in the city. "The hashtag is #our sisterly love," I added helpfully. "Feel free to share your thoughts." Ethan eventually found his voice, his cheeks flushed with humiliation and wrath. "Lauren, you are insane. We can have the marriage annulled." "Actually," I answered, bringing out a folder full of legal paperwork, "you can't. You're both over 18, mentally competent, and said 'I do' in front of 200 witnesses. In this state, consummation is not required for a legal marriage, and there is no evidence of force." Lucas assisted me in conducting in-depth legal study. "Congratulations. You're stuck with each other." "This is revenge pornography," Vanessa screamed, pointing to the television, where her naked image was still visible. "I will sue you." "Actually," Lucas announced, addressing the audience as if he were making a legal presentation, "everything was filmed in places where you had no expectation of privacy. Ethan's apartment building lease specifically includes the installation of surveillance cameras in communal areas in response to recent break-ins. The building management organization lawfully installed them after obtaining tenant authorization. Ethan signed the papers 3 months ago. Furthermore, the church ceremony was a public affair that you both agreed to have filmed. I've got the permits, consent documents, and legal opinions to prove it." Ethan grasped Vanessa's arm, knuckles white with rage. "We're leaving." "Good idea," I remarked pleasantly. "Your honeymoon room at the Hilton has already been paid for and is sadly non-refundable. The penthouse package includes champagne and rose petals. I figured you'd love the irony." Vanessa yelled at Ethan about ruining her life as they hurried through the kitchen to evade the irate guests and cameras who had begun to arrive following Lucas's social media post becoming viral. "This is entirely your fault," she screamed. "You called her stupid, you claimed she wouldn't fight back. You are the one who intended to steal her money," Ethan yelled back. "You said it'd be easy." Their voices faded as they vanished into the parking lot, leaving behind a room full of astonished guests, abandoned bridal gifts, and a 3-tier cake that would remain unfinished. The cleanup took 2 hours. Guests left in tiny groups, with several stopping to apologize to me for not detecting the deceit sooner. Ethan's college pals appeared especially embarrassed. They'd suspected something was wrong but hadn't said anything since they didn't want to get engaged in relationship drama. "We should have told you," remarked Tyler, Ethan's culinary school roommate. "Ethan has been acting strangely for months, canceling plans and lying about where he was going. We assumed he was simply stressed about the wedding." Mrs. Ward was the last to depart. She hugged me hard with tears in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you for standing up for yourself," she told me. "That boy got all he deserved. And Vanessa, well, she'll soon discover what kind of man she married." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Ethan has always been selfish and weak. When things get rough, he flees. Vanessa believes she has won a fantastic treasure, but she will realize that she is married to a coward who will blame her for everything that goes wrong in their lives." The next morning, I awoke in my childhood bedroom for the first time in months, free of tension in my chest. My phone had hundreds of messages, but not the ones I was expecting. Friends and extended relatives were offering their support. They had long thought Vanessa was manipulative, but had never seen proof. The video highlighted trends they'd noticed but dismissed. The way she undermined other women, flirted with taken men, and constantly positioned herself as the victim while causing drama. "I always knew something was off about Vanessa," my college roommate Melissa texted. "Remember how she attempted to convince me you were gossiping about me behind my back? Now I realize she was only attempting to isolate you from your pals." After seeing the video, Ethan's restaurant investors pulled out, with $150,000 in pledged finance gone overnight. Vanessa's job, a conservative law practice specializing in family values, sacked her for moral turpitude and behavior according to the firm's Christian standards. Ryan, Ethan's brother, sent the sweetest message. "Thank God you dodged that bullet. Ethan has been a selfish jerk since we were kids, and Vanessa is ideal for him. 2 narcissists deserve one another. Mom has never been happy to be incorrect about someone." 3 months later, I received a text from Vanessa. "I want a divorce. Ethan is a nightmare, and everyone considers us as parasites. Please help me. I'll repay the money." I took a screenshot and shared it on social media with the caption, "Some people never learn. P.S. What money? I never gave you money." The comments were savage. People who had seen the wedding video had shared it with their acquaintances, and it had spread well beyond our small neighborhood. Vanessa and Ethan had become internet famous as the worst people ever, and proof that karma exists. Vanessa and Ethan remained married a year later, not because they wanted to, but because neither could afford to hire a divorce lawyer. Their reputations and jobs were devastated. They had moved to 3 different states, but Lucas's video accompanied them wherever they went. Social media algorithms ensured that anyone who searched for their identities found the wedding video. Vanessa had to legally alter her name and was employed as a clerk at a petrol station in Wyoming. Ethan was washing dishes at a truck stop diner, his aspirations of owning a restaurant forever dashed. Every time they tried to restart, someone recognized them from the video. Meanwhile, I'd spent the year traveling, starting my own nursing consulting business, and rediscovering myself without Ethan's weight on my shoulders. The money I saved for his restaurant became the initial investment for my own business, which helps hospitals enhance their patient care practices. Last month I got engaged to Lucas, the cousin who had helped plan the perfect retribution. He recognized loyalty, creativity, and the value of sticking up for oneself. As we worked together to repair my life, our friendship inevitably evolved into something more. "You know, I fell in love with you during the planning phase," he informed me as he proposed. "Watching you take control of your life like that, it was the sexiest thing I'd ever seen." Vanessa sent a furious congrats card to my parents' house that read, "Hope your marriage lasts longer than your capacity for forgiveness." I replied with a simple, "It will." I eventually learned to select those who pick me first. The wedding takes place next spring. Vanessa and Ethan aren't invited, but I'm sure they'll find a way to watch the video online. After all, Lucas has already pledged to broadcast the entire event under the hashtag #OurRealLove. The guest list contains everyone who attended the first wedding. They're all excited to celebrate a true love tale this time. Mrs. Ward will escort me down the aisle, as my father died last October. Even Ethan's college friends are coming, bringing their wives, eager to see the woman who exposed those cheaters. What is the best part? Every vendor from the original wedding has given their services for free, including the photographer, florist, and caterer. They all want to be a part of a genuine celebration after unwittingly participating in Vanessa and Ethan's lie. This time, the cake designer explained, "We're making something sweet enough to wash away the bitter taste of last year's disaster." I could not agree more. After 18 months of work, my dad destroyed my thesis laptop hours before submission, saying I didn't deserve a future. But I earned highest honors. My name is Elise. I'm 24 years old, and my father slammed my laptop against my skull 2 days before my PhD thesis deadline. I had been working on the thesis for 18 months. My mother laughed in the corner as blood streamed down my temples. Dad stood over me, his face distorted with anger. "What's your future?" "That's a joke," he spit. "You don't deserve a future. You're just a leech." I never anticipated my educational journey would end this way. If you're watching, I grew up in Millbrook, a little industrial town where the factory whistle regulated life better than any clock. Our humble 2-bedroom house located on the outskirts of town, its peeling paint a daily reminder of what my father termed, having realistic priorities. My father, Victor Morgan, had worked at the steel mill for 27 years. His calloused hands and constant scowl were the consequence of what he proudly described as real work. In his opinion, education was a luxury for those who were too soft to work hard. Marion, Mom, worked part-time at the local cafe when she wasn't maintaining the house exactly as Dad desired. She learned early in their marriage that contradicting him resulted in days of quiet or heated confrontations. She gradually became his echo, confirming his beliefs in order to avoid becoming their target. She would occasionally join him in mocking my intellectual interests, her uneasy laughter serving as a screen against being the next target of his scorn. My older brother, Andrew, was the golden child. He dropped out of high school during his junior year to work alongside his father at the mill. "Now that is a real Morgan," Dad would say proudly at family gatherings, clasping Andrew's shoulder. "None of that book nonsense, just honest work." Andrew readily absorbed these lessons, mimicking Dad in both viewpoint and manner. By the age of 20, he had his own apartment and a stable paycheck, both of which my parents believed to be the pinnacles of success. Meanwhile, I quickly learned that I like learning. Words captivated me. Numbers had mysteries that I longed to uncover. Science projects in our kitchen would cause me to lose track of time until Dad stormed in and demanded that I stop wasting food on silliness. Mrs. Whitaker, my third-grade teacher, was the first to notice. "Elise has remarkable analytical skills," she informed my parents during a conference. They just attended because it was required. Dad glanced at the wall and Mom nodded nicely, both forgetting her remarks before we arrived at the parking lot. By 5th grade, I had won the district spelling bee. The local newspaper published a little piece featuring my photograph. I was happy, clutching my certificate, as my classmates' parents took photos. Mine never appeared. "Had to work overtime," Dad claimed. I subsequently overheard him telling Andrew that it was silly to celebrate learning how to spell phrases that a normal person could simply look up. In 7th grade, my scientific project on water quality in local streams received state distinction. The principal personally called home to deliver the news. Mom said, "That is nice," in the same tone she used to acknowledge the weather forecast. When I asked if they would drive me to the state competition 2 hours away, Dad laughed. We aren't wasting gas just so you may play scientist. This will not put food on the table. High school became my refuge. I joined every academic club I could find, staying after school until the last possible moment before leaving for home. My English teacher, Mr. Callahan, loaned me books from his own library. "Your mind is exceptional, Elise," he once told me. "Do not let anyone dim your light." Miss Rivera, my math instructor, remained late to assist me prepare for advanced placement examinations. "College will open doors you cannot even imagine," she urged. When I became valedictorian, the principal personally invited my parents to the event. They did not attend. Dad had planned a fishing excursion with Andrew. Mom claimed to have a migraine. I presented my speech in front of a throng of strangers, fighting back tears while other students went to hug their ecstatic parents afterwards. I stood alone until Mr. Callahan appeared with a little wrapped gift. It was a journal with the inscription, "Your journey has just begun, the world requires your voice." That night, I made a secret pledge to myself. I would be the first Morgan to attend college. Not just any college, but the greatest one that will accept me. Education would be my escape from the limited future my family anticipated for me. Each rejection of my accomplishments just strengthened my resolve. Each disdainful word strengthened the basis of my resolve. I applied for scholarships in secret, utilized school computers to complete applications because we didn't have internet at home, and set up a special email address that my parents would never discover. To avoid receiving mail at our residence, I got a teacher to serve as my primary contact. While my peers shared their college acceptance letters with supportive families, I kept mine hidden under a loose floorboard beneath my bed, bringing them out at night to reread by flashlight. My fingertips tracing the embossed institution logos like treasure maps to another life. As my family celebrated my graduation, Dad simply remarked, "So, you start at the mill next week, correct?" When I finally mustered the nerve to inform them of my full scholarship to State University, the silence lasted 10 agonizing seconds until Dad slammed his plate against the wall. "Do you think you are too good for honest work? Is it too wonderful for your family? Books and theories do not nourish people, Elise. Real work works." Mom just gazed at her lap, and Andrew smiled and said, "Always knew you were weird." That night, I packed what little I had, knowing the bridge I was crossing was on fire behind me. Despite the terror twisting in my stomach, each item I packed into my luggage seemed like recovering a piece of myself they'd never completely recognized. My first day of college orientation seemed like I had stepped onto another planet. Families helped unload cars loaded with dorm supplies, with mothers fussing over bed layouts and fathers assembling furniture. I came alone on a Greyhound bus, carrying one suitcase and a backpack containing everything I possessed. The scholarship covered tuition and basic room and board, but not anything additional, such as spending money, a laptop, or extra clothes and supplies. "Are your parents arriving later?" Leah, my roommate, inquired as her mother organized their closet space, and her father set up a little fridge he had purchased as a surprise. "They had to work," I told a lie. The first of many over the next 4 years. The truth was too complex and terrible to communicate to these strangers, whose parents embraced them goodbye with tears and pleased grins. The first semester was the most difficult transition. Without a laptop, I spent hours in the computer lab typing papers while other students worked comfortably from home. The financial aid office assisted me in obtaining a work-study employment in the cafeteria, but the hours were limited and the income barely met basic needs. I got a second job waiting tables at a cafe near campus, working nights and weekends while attempting to maintain the GPA required for my scholarship. 3 weeks into October, my meticulously planned budget fell apart when I had strep throat. The doctor appointment and medication drained my modest cash. With nowhere else to go, I swallowed my pride and called home. Mom responded, her voice immediately guarded. "Is everything all right?" she inquired, implying, "Are you finally abandoning this college nonsense?" "I am a little short on money this month," I explained. "I got sick and had some medical bills. I was wondering if I could borrow $100 until my next paycheck." The hush lasted till Dad picked up the phone. "We already have money difficulties. Welcome to the real world, college lady. Maybe now you'll realize what actual responsibility feels like." He hung up without saying anything further. That night, I slept in my car for the first time, unable to pay for both my prescription and my share of the dorm expenses. Leah had family visiting, so I made excuses to stay with a buddy to avoid shame. I spent 2 weeks alternating between the back seat of my 15-year-old Honda and the 24-hour university library, showering in the gym before class. Nobody noticed. I became indistinguishable, just another exhausted student among thousands. By Thanksgiving, most students had gone home for the holiday. I took on extra shifts at the diner, earning double pay and huge tips from customers who felt sorry for the poor college girl working on a holiday. With those cash, I was able to get a small studio apartment off campus at a lower rate than the dorm. It was in a problematic area, but it was mine. Despite these challenges, I thrived academically. My lecturers recognized my hard ethic and intellectual interest. Dr. Patel, my introduction to psychology lecturer, was the first of many mentors who would help define my academic career. After I completed a report on the psychological effects of economic uncertainty on family dynamics, she invited me to stay after class. "This analysis shows remarkable insight," she told me. "Have you ever considered majoring in psychology?" That conversation paved the way for new opportunities. Psychology provided a framework for understanding my own experiences. As I studied family systems, attachment theory, and resilience characteristics, I noticed commonalities in my own childhood. Knowledge became more than just an escape, it was also a source of healing. By sophomore year, I'd established a rigorous but sustainable schedule that included morning classes, afternoon library study sessions, evening work shifts, and late-night homework. I survived on ramen noodles, free campus event food, and the rare lunch bought for me by a professor during academic discussions. To save money on my apartment utility bills, I learned to look for buildings with the finest heating in the winter and air conditioning in the summer. Junior year offered a research assistant employment that paid more than my previous service jobs. Professor Whitmore chose me above dozens of applications based on my academic performance. "Your perspective on socioeconomic factors and family psychology is unusually nuanced," he told me. "Most pupils my age had merely a theoretical comprehension of these topics, if only he knew how intimately I understood them. Each theory I examined shed light on another facet of my family's dynamics. Each academic paper I read helped me put words to experiences I had only felt before." By senior year, I discovered my academic passion, investigating how family settings influence scholastic attainment and psychological development. The irony was not lost on me that my own family had become my most important research. I graduated summa cum laude with departmental honors. Several professors pushed me to apply to graduate programs and provided wonderful recommendations. I felt vindicated when I received my graduate school acceptance letter, which included a teaching assistantship that would cover the majority of my fees. I had proven myself despite all odds. In a moment of optimism, I called home to share the news. Mom responded, sounding older than I remember. "I got accepted into the graduate program at State," I added, attempting to keep the pride out of my voice. "Full funding and a teaching position." "Oh," she stopped. "Okay, more school then. Elise, when do you plan to obtain a real job?" "Mom, this is a legitimate job. I'll be teaching and conducting research." Dad must have been listening on the extension because his voice abruptly cut in. So, the perpetual learner continues to postpone maturing. Some of us have had genuine jobs since we were 16, but I think that is beneath the professor wannabe. I ended the call shortly after, reminding myself of why I had limited communication with them in the first place. Nonetheless, some infantile part of me yearned for approval, recognition that what I had done was worthwhile. That hope now appeared as unrealistic as expecting water from a stone. With graduate school ahead, I needed to find affordable apartments close to university. However, the teaching stipend would barely cover the necessities. After calculating expenditures, I made a difficult decision. I'd rent a small flat in my hometown, 20 minutes from university. The rent was much lower than university area apartments, and I could make the drive. I told myself it was all about money, but maybe a part of me still craved the family connection I'd never had. Graduate school enhanced every aspect of academic life. The homework became more difficult, the expectations increased, and the rivalry grew fiercer. However, for the first time, I felt completely in my element. My college struggles had prepared me for this strain in ways that my more wealthy classmates were only starting to appreciate. My research narrowed down on family psychology, specifically the effect of parental attitudes toward education on children's academic achievement and self-esteem. Every study article I produced revolved around this issue, exploring it from various theoretical perspectives. My lecturers observed the exceptional depth of my analysis. "Most students your age approach these topics theoretically," Dr. Halverson said about one of my articles. "Your work shows a remarkably nuanced understanding of the lived experience." If only she understood how personal this research was to me. Every statistical correlation I examined mirrored events from my own childhood. Every case study contained echoes of my own experience. I was both the researcher and the subject, but I kept this fact disguised under academic terminology and scientific rigor. 3 months into the program, my meticulously managed budget crumbled when my automobile required substantial repairs. The teaching salary barely covered rent, utilities, and food, leaving nothing for emergencies. After exhausting all other possibilities, I grudgingly contacted my parents. "I just need a place to stay for a month or two while I save for a new car," I said, hating the vulnerability in my voice. "I can pay some rent, help with chores, and I will be at the university most days anyway." To my amazement, they agreed without much debate. Dad grumbled about coming back with your tail between your legs, but Mom appeared almost delighted to have me back home. Maybe, I stupidly assumed, time had eased their attitudes. Maybe my dedication may finally gain their appreciation. The first week went remarkably smoothly. I put up a modest workspace in my previous bedroom, which is currently primarily used for storage. I developed a practice of leaving early for university and returning late, limiting our connection time. Mom would periodically leave plates of food in the fridge with my name on them. Dad kept his opinion to a few muttered remarks about career students, but nothing directly aggressive. This tenuous peace enabled me to concentrate on drafting my thesis idea. My past study had naturally led me to this topic: educational resilience in first-generation college students, family dynamics, and psychological coping mechanisms. My thesis committee warmly accepted it, citing its potential benefits to better understanding impediments to higher education access. Dr. Halverson consented to be my principal consultant, providing valuable assistance and support as I established my study technique. The initial research phase proceeded nicely. I conducted literature reviews, created survey items, and received institutional review board approval for human subjects research. I organized interviews with 20 first-generation college students, carefully selecting individuals whose experiences would provide different perspectives on the topic I was researching. Each interview lasted 2 to 3 hours and provided valuable qualitative data that both verified and complicated my initial notion. As the workload increased, so did tensions at home. What started as subtle jabs turned into daily commentary on my obsession with schooling and concerns about when I'd join the real world. Dad was especially upset with my laptop, which represented everything he loathed about intellectual pursuits. "Staring at that screen all day will rot your brain," he would say, purposefully turning on the television at full power while I was working. "People who type for a living are just pretending to work," Mom repeated her usual pattern of passive reinforcement. "Your father just wants what is best for you," she would reply in response to particularly harsh statements. Perhaps a comfortable office job would be preferable to all this stress. Simpler. Simpler. As if I desired simplicity. As if I hadn't spent my entire life fighting for a simple escape. My brother Andrew began visiting more frequently. When I was immersed in thought, he would burst into my room without knocking, ask irrelevant questions, or remind me of family obligations I had allegedly neglected. Each interruption sapped vital time and mental energy as I battled to regain my concentration. Sleep became a luxury that I could rarely afford. I started working through the evenings when the house was quiet, getting a few hours of sleep in the early morning before traveling to university. The physical and emotional weariness mounted, but my determination only became greater. Every impediment they erected spurred my determination to complete my thesis, to demonstrate once and for all that their restricted perception of my worth was incorrect. 6 weeks before the submission deadline, Dr. Halverson evaluated my paper and provided important criticism that required significant adjustments. "Your analysis is solid," she said, "but you should rearrange your conclusions to better meet the theoretical framework. These links are inherent in your work, but they should be explicit." This setback was accompanied by technological troubles that corrupted some of my backup data. I missed several days of work, forcing me to piece together difficult statistical analyses from memory and scattered notes. The pressure increased as the deadline approached, with seemingly insurmountable problems. Every day, I felt the thesis slip further from completion. The night I overheard my parents discussing me in the kitchen was the tipping point. I came downstairs for coffee, hoping to remain up for another all-night writing session. Their voices came from around the corner. "She thinks she is so smart with all those books and big words," my dad said. "What use is a fancy degree if you still live with your parents at 24? At the age of 19, Andrew acquired his own place. "I worry about her," Mom said, not in defense but in agreement. "All this schooling, and for what? No husband, no children, just papers that no one will ever read." "Waste of time and money," Dad concluded. "Should have gone to work after high school like a normal person." I retired quietly to my chamber, their words searing like venom in my chest. I retired quietly to my chamber, their words searing like venom in my chest. The weight of them pressed down on me. I could almost feel each sentence embed itself further in my head. With newfound motivation, I worked for 20 hours straight, powered by coffee and wrath. The hours merged into one another, and the world beyond my screen vanished. My fingers glided across the keyboard with mechanical accuracy. By the time daylight broke, I had rebuilt the lost analysis and applied the majority of Dr. Halverson's recommended changes. My thesis was 90% complete. Only the final pieces remained, with 48 hours to submission. That morning, Dad increased his interference. He barged into my room every 30 minutes, making minor demands or comments. Each encroachment was like a hammer breaking glass, shattering my concentration. It took me longer and longer to collect my thoughts again. Mom joined in, but more subtly. She insisted on taking breaks to eat meals I didn't desire, or to help with domestic activities that couldn't wait. "Your thesis will still be there tomorrow," she responded dismissively when I mentioned the deadline. "Family comes first." The last 24 hours were a struggle of wills. I had retreated to the dining room table, which was the only place with enough space for my reference materials. My notes, research articles, and drafts were carefully organized. Dad purposely turned on the television in the next living room and switched to a sports station at full blast. The sound echoed through the walls. When I requested him to lower it, he went on a diatribe about ungrateful children. My house. My rules. I labored all night, finishing the last adjustments as sunlight began to shine through the curtains. Only formatting and one final proofread remained. The submission deadline was 12 o'clock. I felt fatigued, yet triumphant. I had surmounted every impediment they had set in my way. The thesis was excellent. It was truly fascinating work, with significant contributions to my field. For the first time in weeks, I let myself feel a flicker of pride. When Dad walked into the dining room, coffee mug in hand, everything changed forever. The morning of my thesis submission day began with deceiving tranquility. Birds chirped outside my window. Sunlight seeped through the poor blinds, creating faint patterns on the crowded floor. I'd been awake for over 36 hours straight, fueled by black coffee and pure willpower. My eyes burned from gazing at the screen, but a sense of satisfaction overcame the tiredness. Just a few more hours, I reminded myself. With just a few more hours and 18 months of work, my thesis would be complete. The home was peaceful. Too quiet. I tiptoed into the kitchen for my 5th coffee refill. The microwave's digital clock illuminated at 7:06 a.m. There were less than 5 hours left until the noon deadline. I only needed to finish the final proofread, arrange the references to academic standards, and create the submission package. If nothing goes wrong, I'll finish with plenty of time left over. My workspace was arranged on the dining room table. I had moved there the previous evening after Dad took over the living room for a loud basketball game. My references and notes were carefully arranged into piles, each representing a portion of my thesis. My laptop, an old model that I had bought second-hand with my teaching stipend, hummed steadily as it processed the enormous document. The first sign of problems occurred about 7:30 a.m. when Dad emerged from his bedroom. On his days off, he usually slept in until about 8 a.m. His early look immediately threw off alarms in my thoughts. He paused in the kitchen doorway, eyes narrowed as he examined my workspace. "Still playing student, I see," he said, his voice bearing that old dismissive tone. "Normal people are heading to work right about now." I bit back the response that had formed instantaneously in my head. "Just a few more hours," I reminded myself. "Do not engage. Don't give him an excuse." "Good morning, Dad," I responded, keeping my tone calm. "I'll be done shortly. My submission is due by noon." He grunted and moved to the coffee maker. Submission. A fancy name for homework. When I was your age, I already had a family. The words hung in the air like an outdated accusation. I'd heard them hundreds of times before. Today they scarcely registered. I went back to my screen. Mom appeared next, with her hair still in curlers. She pursed her lips as she studied the dining room table. "All these papers everywhere," she said. "We need to set the table for breakfast." "I just need a few more hours," I explained, trying not to sound desperate. "It's due today. It represents the conclusion of 2 years of study." "Work?" Dad sneered in the kitchen. "Typing is not working. Try hauling steel beams in 100-degree heat. That's work." Mom placed a hand on my shoulder. To anyone else, it may have been supportive, but I noticed the subtle pressure in her fingertips. surely you may take a quick break for family breakfast. We hardly see you anymore. The irony of this statement was nearly hilarious. For weeks they had complained about my presence, about my laptop, about my documents cluttering their area. Now, family togetherness was a priority, and it happened to be right when my deadline was approaching. I really cannot stop right now, I stated firmly. The formatting is extremely precise, and I need to concentrate. Dad appeared at the doorway, holding a coffee mug hard. Your mom asked you to clear the table for breakfast. This was not a request. His speech had a deadly edge that I recognized from boyhood. That tone was always used before punishments and intense anger. Still, I could not give. Not today. Not with everything at stake. I will eat later, I offered as a compromise. You and Mom can use the kitchen counter. I just need to finish this. His face clouded. Ungrateful. That is what schooling does. It makes children believe they are too good for family meals. Too vital to respect the house rules. Mom used her normal peacekeeping line. Victor, please let her finish her school project. She can join us later. However, her statements lacked conviction. We all knew it. Dad slapped his mug down, spilling coffee over the rim. Project, she is 24 years old and spends her time on school assignments, while actual grown-ups work. I tried to ignore his voice by focused solely on my screen. Just keep working. Do not engage. Every minute of distraction was a minute lost, and the deadline was fixed. Andrew showed up unannounced at 9:30. His visits became disturbingly frequent during my thesis completion phase, always coinciding with periods of intense concentration. It was as if he had an internal radar that detected when I was in the midst of anything vital. The front door opened without a single knock. His booming voice filled the house immediately, breaking the fragile bubble of concentration I had been attempting to preserve. Have a family breakfast. Mom told me you were cooking, Dad, he said, dropping his keys loudly onto the counter so the sound echoed. He walked toward the dining room, peeking over my shoulder without asking. His gaze flickered to the TV. Are you still writing that paper? I thought you'd be done by now. Thesis, I corrected reflexively, my gaze fixed on the text. And yes, I am finishing it today. Andrew laughed briefly and dismissively. Thesis, paper, homework, whatever, same thing, right? He did not wait for a response. Hey, did I tell you about my promotion at the mill? He is currently the supervisor. Full benefits, pension. The works. Dad's face lit up instantaneously, a reaction I'd never seen in response to any of my accomplishments. That's my boy, he declared, beaming with pride. This is real job, real rewards. Enough of this degree nonsense that never ends. The contrast was nearly physically excruciating. My chest tightened, like if my father's words were pressing down on it. I had to physically stop myself from reacting by biting down on the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. I took a long breath, focusing my concentration back on my citations. I would not be baited. I would not give them the satisfaction of knowing their remarks were reaching me. The next 2 hours were a flurry of planned sabotage. Passive-aggressive comments, unnecessary noises, and thinly veiled hatred. Mom came into the dining room repeatedly, dusting surfaces that did not require cleaning. Dad turned up the television volume in the living room every 15 minutes until I could hear the commentators as if they were standing next to me. Andrew made loud phone conversations directly behind my chair, pacing just enough to brush against my workspace each time he moved by. By 11:30 my nerves had frayed to the breaking point, but the finish line was within sight. The thesis was formatted properly, citations are verified, abstractly polished, everything was ready. All that left was a final save and submission via the university site. I truly intended to make it. Despite everything. Despite them. That is when the internet connection failed. I looked at the error notice with astonishment. No link is available. I checked my phone. There is no service there either. With growing dread, I strolled into the living room, where Dad was sitting in front of the television, his streaming service running flawlessly, high-definition picture included. The internet is out in the dining room, I remarked, straining to maintain my voice. I need to submit my thesis in the next 30 minutes. Can you check the router? He kept his gaze fixed on the television. Internet's working fine for me. But it's not working on my laptop or phone, I said, dread creeping into my voice. Please, this is vital. I need to submit by noon. He turned slowly, his face unreadable. Funny how these emergencies always revolve around your schoolwork. Never seem to have technical difficulties when it comes to assisting your mother with tasks. The revelation came with chilling clarity. Have you done anything to the internet? A faint, contented smile pulled on the corner of his lips. My house. My internet. Perhaps I turned on parental restrictions. Perhaps the dining area is suddenly a computer-free zone. Blood raced to my face. My voice shook from the effort of restraint. I need to submit my thesis. This is my future, Dad. He laughed, and the sound was entirely devoid of humor. What's your future? That is a joke. He stood up and loomed over me. What future does unending schooling provide? Andrew has a house, a promotion, and a normal life. What have you got? A stack of papers that no one will read, plus student debt. Mom arrived in the doorway, drawn by the rising noises. Instead of intervening, she remained calmly, her presence an implicit confirmation of his actions. I need to get this submitted, I said as I moved for the router. I'll reset the connection myself. His hand shot out and bruised my arm. You don't touch anything in my house without permission. Let go of me, I muttered, pulling my arm away. This is insane. I only need internet access for 5 minutes. Your work? He scoffed. Do you mean your excuse for avoiding real responsibility? Your lofty education, which leads you to believe you are superior to us? Something inside of me cracked. This was never about my education. This has always been about your insecurities. You're threatened because I selected a different path. His expression turned into rage. You ungrateful little... I cut him off. I am not ungrateful. I'm ambitious. I am determined. And I will not allow you to damage my future because you do not comprehend it. I turned and headed into the dining room to get my laptop. If I had to drive to campus, I would. The 30-minute journey would probably make me late, but I had to try. I heard him follow, his big footsteps causing the floor to quiver. I reached for my laptop as soon as he entered. You think you're so much smarter than everyone, he continued, speaking dangerously quietly. So much better than your family because of your precious education. I did not respond. I was completely concentrated on obtaining my materials as rapidly as possible. Time was running out. Look at me when I'm talking to you, he said. I continued packing. I said, look at me. I turned, hugging my laptop against my chest like a shield. I need to go, we can discuss this later. There is nothing to talk about, he murmured, moving closer. You must learn respect. You need to understand your place. My place is not here, I said, the truth echoing through my own ears. It never was. Something changed in his gaze, a frightening spark. Later, I'd recognize it as the moment when his desire for control took precedence over everything else. In that moment, he was no longer my father, but rather a man who could not endure to be challenged. Your future, he said, his voice oddly calm. That is a joke. His hand shot out at my laptop. For a brief time I imagined he might simply take it away, hide it until the deadline passed, a petty punishment. But I couldn't have predicted what happened next. He yanked the laptop from my grasp with the force of decades of physical labor and ferocious wrath. Our gazes locked for just a fraction of a second. There was no pause in his voice, no moment of parental reconsideration, only hard, purposeful rage. The laptop then landed hard on the side of my head. The collision ripped through my skull like a bullet. Pain erupted instantly, white-hot and excruciating. The device's corner struck just above my right temple, and I felt the skin tear open. Warm wetness started running down my face. The punch knocked me backward till my shoulders smacked the wall. My vision clouded and darkened at the edges. Through the haze, I saw my laptop fall to the floor, the screen separating from the keyboard with a horrible snap of plastic and electronics. 18 months of work vanished in an instant. You don't deserve a future, Dad said, hovering over me as I slid down the wall. You are just a leech. The most shocking sound came next. Laughter. My mom's laughter. She stood at the doorway, high and scared, and watched. Not intervening. I am not calling for assistance. There is no evidence of maternal protection. Instead of assaulting his daughter, her husband simply laughed, as if he had delivered a little inappropriate joke. Victor, she finally replied, still giggling. That's enough now. Enough. Blood was already dripping into my eye. My thesis, graduate degree and future were all in pieces on the floor. And for my mother, this was simply enough. Dad loomed over me, chest heaving, as if astonished by his own deeds but not at all sorry. Clean yourself up, he said finally. And clean up this mess too. He turned and went away. Mom followed him like a shadow. The kitchen was filled with the mundane noises of coffee being poured and the refrigerator door opening and closing, as if nothing unusual had occurred. As if he hadn't just crossed an indelible border. I stayed on the floor for several minutes, stunned and immobile. The anguish in my head pounded with every heartbeat. When I finally touched my temple, my fingers turned scarlet with blood. The incision was deep enough that I'd probably require stitches. More immediately troubling were the nausea and dizziness, which are clear indicators of a suspected concussion. With shaky hands, I collected the broken parts of my laptop. The screen was supported by a single wire from the keyboard. The case was split, with plastic parts spread like shrapnel on the floor. I tried to press the power button. Nothing. Not even a glimmer of life. The machine that supported my entire academic career has died. Panic cut through the ache. I needed those files. There had to be some way. I stumbled to the restroom, grasping the counter to keep myself stable. The mirror revealed an inch-long cut over my right temple. Blood was still flowing freely. My eye had already begun to swell, indicating a huge bruise before morning. I pressed a clean washcloth against the area and applied pressure. The bathroom light was really bright. When I moved my head too quickly, the room whirled. I should have gone to the ER, but the thesis deadline loomed greater than my physical well-being. Noon. Less than an hour remained. I returned to the dining room, a washcloth placed to my head. Andrew was now sitting at the table, going through his phone as if nothing unusual had occurred. "Dad really got you good," he said without looking up. Should have known better than to talk back. The casual way he recognized the assault, without condemnation, was nearly as unsettling as the crime itself. "I need to get my thesis files off this laptop," I replied, ignoring his comment. "Do you have a computer that I can use? I need to submit by noon." He laughed. "Are you still anxious about homework since Dad pushed you to next week? Your priorities are off, sis." "Please," I pleaded, hating the imploring tone in my voice. "This is my graduation thesis, everything I have worked for. I only need to access the files." He shrugged. "Sorry, I left my laptop at home. Besides, the stuff is toasted. There's no chance you'll get anything out of it." I knew he was correct. The destruction was devastating. Nonetheless, I had to try. With trembling hands, I gathered the broken pieces into my bag. Blood continued to flow through the washcloth, and there was no time to treat it properly. I needed to leave. Mom arrived at the doorway as I prepared to go. "Where do you think you are going?" she asked, as if I were a teen violating curfew rather than an ill adult. "Go to the hospital, and then to campus," I said without glancing at her. I couldn't stomach seeing the woman who had laughed while I was bleeding. "Your father is still upset," she explained, dropping her voice. "Maybe you should wait for him to settle down." I apologize for provoking him. The folly of her suggestion struck me as a second blow. Apologize? For what? For seeking education? Are you expecting basic human respect? For having my skull split open by my father? "Don't be dramatic, Elise," she groaned. "It was simply a small dispute that escalated. Family disagreements occur." "It wasn't a disagreement, Mom. This was an assault." Her expression stiffened. "Now you're simply acting ridiculous. Your father will never—" "He just did." I pointed to my wounded head. "Look at me. Check out what he did." She looked at my damage with chilly detachment. "You'll probably need a few stitches. I can drive you to urgent care after lunch." After lunch? The remarks left a bad taste in my mouth. As if my deadline, career and future were not fading by the second. "I am leaving," I stated firmly, gathering my bags, "and I am not coming back." Dad's words resounded from the living room. "If you go out that door, do not bother returning back. Ungrateful children do not get second chances in this house." Mom's eyes implored and accused simultaneously. "I see what you've started. Just apologize, and this will all be over." "No more," I replied. "Goodbye, Mom." "You'll regret this," I heard her say. "When your fancy education leaves you alone with no family, you'll regret choosing books over blood." I did not respond. There was nothing more to say. With my broken laptop gripped to my breast and blood still pouring down my cheeks, I stepped into the dazzling sunlight of a future that had suddenly become disconnected from everything I'd labored for. The dizziness hit me strongly as I approached my car. Concussion symptoms worsened, making it difficult to focus. My phone said 11:40. No time to get to campus. There is no method to restore my files. There is no chance of extension without proof. But for the first time in my life, I had no plan, and surprisingly, no dread. I started the car and drove away from the house, which had served as both a jail and a battlefield for the previous 24 years. Whatever came next, I'd confront it without being weighed down by their toxic expectations. Blood might be thicker than water. However, it was never intended to be spilled by those who claim to love you. I drove aimlessly for 20 minutes, my mind clouded by agony and horror. Blood had poured through the washcloth, and the aching in my head got worse with each passing minute. Eventually, I arrived at Riverside Park, an empty public space on a weekday morning. I parked behind a shady oak tree and finally allowed myself to experience the full impact of what had occurred. The tears came quickly and violently. Great heaving sobs that appeared to come from some primordial place I'd kept hidden for years. I sobbed for the little child whose accomplishments were routinely disregarded. For the teen who secreted college acceptance letters as if they were contraband. For the PhD student whose own father ruined her work out of resentment and fear. Most of all, I sobbed for the daughter who had spent her entire life seeking acceptance from parents who were fundamentally incapable of providing it. My phone made a piercing ding, interrupting the collapse. Dr. Halverson sent an email to Elise at noon. "The deadline is coming. Please validate the submission status." Reality struck back with devastating force. The thesis. The deadline. My entire academic future is hanging in the balance. I checked the time. 11:52. With 8 minutes left, I was sitting in a park with a head injury and a damaged laptop. It appeared hopeless. Then something changed inside me. A weird calm descended, displacing panic and despair. If my family taught me anything, it was to be resilient in the face of overwhelming circumstances. I'd spent my entire life conquering their challenges. This was only one more hurdle, perhaps the most severe. First and foremost, I found a clean tissue in my glove compartment and applied it to my still bleeding temple. Then I quickly responded to Dr. Halverson. "Emergency situation. I'm heading to campus right now. Please advise on the late submission protocol." The response arrived almost instantly. "What type of emergency? Are you okay?" I paused before deciding that honesty was the only alternative. A physical injury necessitated medical attention. Laptop was destroyed. Cannot access thesis files. I will explain in person. I started the car and drove to campus gently to compensate for my dizziness. My phone was pinging again. Dr. Halverson had said, "Go to University Health Services immediately. I'll see you there. Don't worry about your thesis right now." Her care, which differed from my family's reaction, brought tears to my eyes. I followed her directions and carefully navigated to the University Health Center. By the time I arrived, blood had soaked through the tissue and was running down my cheeks again. The receptionist took one glance at me and instantly directed me to an examination room. Gallagher, a middle-aged nurse with caring eyes and efficient hands, treated my wound while asking soft questions about what had happened. I found myself telling her the plain truth. My father smashed my laptop against my head when I tried to submit my thesis. I said the words, which sounded strange even as I spoke them. Her hands paused for a time before returning to their work. "This injury is consistent with what you're describing," she explained carefully. "I'm going to chronicle everything thoroughly. The doctor will be here momentarily to see if you need stitches, and we will need to check you for concussion." "I have a thesis deadline," I said. Or had. It was noon. "Your health comes first," Gallagher stated firmly. "Academic deadlines can be extended due to medical crises. This definitely qualifies." Dr. Halverson arrived as the doctor was examining me. She took one glance at my injury, and her professional demeanor wavered somewhat. "Oh my God, Elise," she exclaimed. "What happened?" The doctor, who had just confirmed I had a slight concussion requiring 4 sutures, looked up. "Are you her professor?" Dr. Halverson nodded. "Thesis advisor." "Your student has sustained a significant head injury," he said. "Concussion protocols need to be followed. No screens, limited cognitive strain for at least 48 hours. "Of course," she replied promptly. "The deadline has been completely waived. We can negotiate extensions after she has healed." While the doctor was preparing to patch my wound, Dr. Halverson grabbed a chair beside the examination table. "Elise, the nurse claimed that your laptop was used as a weapon. Can you explain what happened?" For the second time that day, I described the circumstances leading up to my injuries. Dr. Halverson listened without interrupting, her expression becoming more concerned. After I finished, she took a long breath. First of all, your thesis has not been lost. You sent me a draft 2 days ago, remember? We have that version at least. In the midst of the chaos, I felt a rush of relief. I had forgotten about the email. Second, she added, the university has protocols for circumstances like these. What occurred to you is assault, and we must report it. The university police station is right next door. Would you be willing to communicate with them once your medical treatment has concluded? I paused. Filing a police report against my own father appeared to be a one-way ticket. However, he had already crossed an irrevocable boundary by attacking me. Yes, I concluded, I will report it. The next several hours were a haze of medical operations and public declarations. The doctor patched my wound while outlining concussion treatment standards. A university police officer recorded my testimony, photographed my injury, and documented the damaged laptop as proof. The student services coordinator arranged me emergency temporary accommodation in a graduate apartment complex, as returning to my parents' house was clearly not an option. Throughout it all, Dr. Halverson stood by my side, advocating for me with various university departments. She assisted me in obtaining an emergency deadline extension for my thesis submission and arranging for IT assistance to attempt data recovery from my destroyed laptop. The graduate school dean has approved a 2-week extension given the circumstances, she told me as we sat in the student services office. And the IT department believes they may be able to recover your files from the hard drive, which seems intact despite the external damage. I do not know how to thank you, I murmured, overcome by her kindness. You do not need to thank me, she said firmly. This is what academic communities are meant to do. Assist one another. What occurred to you is outrageous, and ensuring you can do your work despite it is the bare minimum we can provide. Her remarks hit a deep chord. Support, community, concepts so different to my family's experience that they appeared practically mythological. Yet here they were, providing actual assistance when I most needed it. By late afternoon, the immediate issue was resolved. My wound was treated, a police report was filed, temporary housing was provided, and academic arrangements were made. The IT department had grabbed my laptop and promised to try data recovery overnight. I was told to relax and follow concussion protocol, which included no reading or screen time for at least 24 hours. As Dr. Halverson led me to my temporary housing, she offered a question that caught me off guard. Elise, is this the first time your father has used physical violence against you? Yes, I responded angrily. The emotional abuse has been constant, but this was the first physical attack. She nodded carefully. I suspected as much based on your research focus. Many family psychology scholars are drawn to the field because of personal experience. Her insight was frightening yet validating. Is it so obvious? Only to someone familiar with the patterns, she informed me. Your understanding of family dynamics has always been extraordinarily nuanced for someone your age. Now I understand why. We arrived at the apartment complex, and she assisted me in settling into the plain but pleasant emergency housing unit. Before leaving, she left a business card on the counter. This is the contact information for the University Counseling Center, she told me. They have crisis counselors on call 24 hours a day. Please consider phoning them. What you have gone through is distressing, and processing it with expert help might be useful. After she departed, I sat on the edge of the foreign bed, drained both physically and emotionally. The day's events were bizarre and intense, like something out of a dream. My head throbbed despite the pain medicine, and my thoughts kept returning to the moment when metal and plastic collided with bone, when blood poured down my face as my mother smiled. I took up Dr. Halverson's card and the phone. Some burdens were too enormous to bear alone. The next morning, a university IT worker knocked on my door, holding a small external hard disk. We were able to recover most of your files, he explained. Despite the laptop's damage, the hard disk remained amazingly intact. We've transferred everything to this external drive. I accepted it with trembling hands caused by a combination of medication, tiredness, and deep relief. Thank you. You have no idea what this means. Just doing my job, he said, smiling. The tech department wishes you a speedy recovery. After he went, I connected the drive to the loaner laptop given by student services. There was my thesis, complete with the exception of the final few modifications I had made the morning of the incident. This was a miracle given what could have happened. Despite the concussion protocol's warning against screen time, I spent the next several hours finishing the final formatting and changes. My head ached, and my eyesight momentarily clouded, but resolve trumped physical discomfort. By late afternoon, I had submitted the completed thesis through the university's website. Moments later, the confirmation email arrived. The thesis had been received. Submission was recorded. Those 5 words meant victory over every impediment my family had thrown in my way. Despite their efforts to disrupt my studies, despite physical and emotional assault, property ruin and personal pain, I had succeeded. The thesis was submitted. The degree requirements would be completed. The future they said I didn't deserve remained mine to claim. As I closed the laptop, a powerful realization came over me. Instead of supporting me, the relatives who should have stood by my side attempted to ruin me. However, their hostility had molded the toughness that enabled me to overcome the harm they caused. The ultimate response to their hostility was not hatred or retribution, but accomplishment on my own terms. With that in mind, I called the university's legal office to inquire about seeking a restraining order. To remove any prospect of return, several bridges had to be burned down rather than simply crossed. My parents had made their decision. Now I was creating mine. The physical healing process began with 4 stitches above my right temple. The wound healed beautifully, leaving a little scar that would diminish but never totally disappear. In some ways, it seemed appropriate, a permanent visible reminder of the moment that severed my final link to my family of origin. The concussion symptoms lasted nearly 3 weeks. Headache, sensitivity to light, and occasional dizziness, but progressively faded as my brain healed from the blow. University health services followed my progress with weekly appointments, and the campus counseling facility became a fixture in my schedule, with twice-weekly sessions that helped me process not only the assault but also the years of emotional abuse that preceded it. My thesis defense was postponed by a month to allow for my rehabilitation. When the big day arrived, I stood in front of my committee with the confidence that comes from having survived the worst and still going on. The questions were hard but fair, and my solutions were clear and well-reasoned. At the end, Dr. Halverson declared what I had barely dared to hope for. Highest honors. A unanimous decision. Those remarks echoed in my thoughts as I strolled across campus later. Highest accolades. After all, I hadn't just succeeded, I had excelled. The approval was nice, but more essential was the internal knowledge that I had overcome enormous challenges. No external acknowledgement could compare to the strength I discovered within myself. The restraining order against my parents was obtained uncontested. They did not attend the court, instead issuing a brief statement through their lawyer alleging that I was always prone to hyperbole and attention-seeking conduct. The judge evaluated the medical evidence, police report, and images of my injury before ruling their answer, concerning in its dismissiveness of documented assault. The order was approved for the maximum term, with the option to extend it if needed. As spring gave way to summer, the university delivered some surprising news. The department has an opportunity for a research assistant post with a moderate pay and on-campus housing for the forthcoming academic year. Dr. Halverson suggested me. Your thesis has attracted the attention of several faculty members, she noted when we met to discuss the chance. The interplay of family dynamics, educational resilience, and first-generation student experiences is becoming more relevant to our institutional aims. We'd like you to continue and develop this research. The post would allow me to stay in the academic setting where I had found support and purpose, while also putting my independence on a stronger footing. I agreed immediately. 2 months after the assault, while I was settling into my new campus housing and research position, an unexpected visitor arrived at my office door. Andrew stood awkwardly in the corridor, appearing both defiant and uncertain. "Can we talk?" he inquired, his typical bluster noticeably lacking. I hesitated, my hand involuntarily reaching for the thin scar on my temple. "That depends on what you want to say." He flinched at the gesture. "I am not here to defend them," he replied immediately. "What Dad did was wrong. Really wrong." The admission startled me to stillness. Andrew had always been our father's echo, confirming every criticism and disdain of my decisions. "Mom and Dad told everyone you fell and hit your head on the table," he says. "But I noticed the broken laptop. I know what happened, and you are only now accepting it, 2 months later." He looked down. "I should have said something that day. Should have stopped him or aided you later." I realized the apology was implicit rather than direct, which was typical of my family's emotional constipation in communication. Nonetheless, it marked a considerable shift from our previous dynamic. "Why are you here, Andrew?" I asked directly. "I got you something," he explained, reaching inside his jacket pocket. He produced a tiny box and placed it on my desk. To replace what was broken. Inside was a brand new laptop that was far superior to the destroyed second-hand model. The gesture was both touching and insufficient, a tangible answer to a deeply rooted issue. "Thank you," I replied thoughtfully. "But a laptop does not fix what happened." "I know," he confessed. "Nothing actually solves it." Dad had crossed a line that day. Mom, too, had a reaction. He paused, appearing to struggle with his next words. "I've been thinking a lot about how they treated you compared to me, how they always made your accomplishments appear insignificant while applauding me for trivial matters. It was unfair." Andrew's recognition was seismic. He had benefited throughout his life from the unequal allocation of parental approval. Recognizing it needed a level of self-reflection that I did not believe he was capable of. "No, it was not fair," I acknowledged. "But it shaped who I am. For better or worse." "Mostly better looks," he observed, looking around my university office with apparent adoration. "You made it despite them. Maybe even because of them, in some strange way." His insight startled me. Maybe he was more insightful than I gave him credit for. "Will you stay in touch?" he inquired as he prepared to depart. "Not with them. Only with me. I would like to know how you're doing." I seriously evaluated the request. Andrew had participated in the familial dynamic that resulted in violence, but he was also a product of that environment, fashioned by the same forces that had nearly destroyed me. "We can try," I said hesitantly. It was a little but substantial opening. The capacity to deliberately reconstruct family connections on my own terms gave me a new level of power. As my research position became more permanent, I started combining my personal experiences into outreach initiatives for first-generation college students from disadvantaged families. Without disclosing the exact trauma, I was able to connect with students who were suffering comparable challenges: parental rejection, a lack of support, and deliberate undermining of academic ambitions. Family resistance to your education often says more about their insecurities than your choices, I would tell these youngsters. Your pursuit of knowledge threatens the status quo, challenges their worldview, and sometimes highlights opportunities they never had, or choices they regret not making. This approach enabled many students to depersonalize their objections, viewing it as a systemic issue rather than a personal failure. The opportunity to use my unpleasant experiences to help others became the most unexpected gift of my trip. 1 year after the assault, I was invited to present my study at a national conference on educational equity. Standing at the stage in front of hundreds of educators and scholars, I felt a deep sense of validation. My father's attempt to discourage me had resulted in professional recognition, meaningful work, and a community that appreciated precisely what my family had discarded. Educational resilience is not just about academic persistence despite socioeconomic barriers, I explained during my presentation. It is also about retaining self-belief when those who should be your strongest supporters turn out to be your biggest impediments. For many first-generation students, the most significant accomplishment is not the degree itself, but the psychological stamina required to seek it in the face of deliberate discouragement from those whose praise they most crave. The subsequent standing ovation was gratifying, but the true prize came during the networking session that followed, when student after student approached me to express how my framework had helped them comprehend their own family dynamics. I had translated personal suffering into professional insight that could help others. There could be no greater victory over the story that my parents had attempted to impose. As for my parents, the distance I kept proved to be the healthiest option. Andrew's occasional updates suggested that they had not modified their stance, characterizing the assault as a misunderstanding, and portraying themselves as victims of an ungrateful daughter. Their refusal to admit the truth of what transpired just proved the validity of my decision to stay away from them. The most profound realization came gradually, through both professional research and personal reflection. Their treatment of me had never been about me at all. My father's fury, my mother's enabling, and my brother's initial involvement were all the result of their own limitations, anxieties, and unrealized potential. Understanding this did not explain their actions, but it did relieve me of the burden of wondering what I could have done better to gain their acceptance. Nothing. The answer was nothing, because their condemnation was never based on my decisions or achievements. It was about how those accomplishments reflected back on them, about their own lives. My achievement became a mirror they couldn't bear to look at, so they attempted to break it instead. In breaking away, I discovered the freedom to define family on my own terms. Colleagues who helped me through a crisis, students who shared their comparable experiences, mentors who saw my potential when my parents did not. These individuals became my chosen family. Connected not by blood, but by mutual respect, shared beliefs, and genuine concern for one another's well-being. 2 years after the laptop incident, I stood in my new apartment, hanging a framed copy of my master's degree on the wall. The little scar on my temple had faded into a thin silver line that could only be seen if you knew where to look. Like so many other parts of that day, it had faded, but not vanished, blending into who I had become rather than defining me. My phone rang with a message from Dr. Halverson. The curriculum committee has approved your planned course on family dynamics and educational resilience for next semester. Congratulations, Professor Morgan. I smiled at the title, Professor Morgan. My father had declared that I didn't deserve my future, but it was now unquestionably mine. Not despite his cruelty, but because of how it shaped me. Every challenge they threw at me only increased my determination. Every dismissal had fueled my desire. The most profound lesson of my experience was not about familial trauma or intellectual perseverance, though both were important. The underlying truth was about the human ability to turn pain into purpose, to convert rejection into the gold of self-actualization. We have no control over the families we are born into, but we can choose who we become, and the families we establish for ourselves. Have you ever had to deal with opposition from those who should have backed you? How did you find the confidence to pursue your dreams despite their discouragement? Thank you for listening. Take care. Good luck. Perhaps listening to today's story has prompted you to ask new questions or recalled old recollections. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments spark new tales, which connect us all. Everyone's life journey is unique, and we all try to interpret the world in our own manner. These moments serve as a reminder that we are all human, sometimes happy, sometimes sad, and always learning new things. If you loved this article, please share it with your friends. Your views and feedback are always valuable to us because they inspire us to create even better material. Every tale has a distinct perspective, and our goal is to comprehend everyone's point of view in order to create diverse and relatable material. Stories like these remind us that everyone's journey through life is unique, and hearing other people's stories teaches us new things. You can also share your own experiences with us. We value your experiences as well. If you enjoyed this video, please provide feedback. We strive to generate content that always brightens your mind and inspires you with fresh thoughts. If you've seen this video before, your feedback is still valuable. Every piece of input helps us enhance our material and provide our readers with a different viewpoint. Today, what we witnessed was only a fraction of the numerous stories shared on Reddit and around the world. It's a reminder that we all try to comprehend life by sharing our experiences with one another. This film is only one example of how we use storytelling to connect with others and learn about various aspects of life. We aim to continue sharing stories that will help us all learn and grow together. Thank you for your time, and please keep a lookout for more stories coming soon. If you haven't already, please like and follow for more great material. Your sponsorship keeps us running, and we will continue to bring you thought-provoking and touching tales. Until next time, take care and remain curious.